Welcome back to the 411 Podcasting Network. I'm your host, Larry Csonka, and this is episode 11 of the 411 on Wrestling Podcast. You can follow the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, and of course on 411mania.com. And today we have a treat. We're going to have a loaded show. It's not going to feature a lot of me. We're bringing back some names from the past. Good friends Jerome and Ryan Rozanski, who used to be 411 contributors, did work with PW Ponderings, and still like the podcast to talk about the wrestling, are going to carry the bulk of the show today. But I do have Jerome on the line with me right now, and we're going to talk a little bit about Mania weekend and just how things are going. And Jerome, how are you?
I am doing well, Larry. It is great to be talking to you, period. It's even better to be talking to you on your podcast, though, because I know that this is something that you've been wanting to do. And I know that the last few months for you have not been great, but it was just great to be able to see you writing reviews on 411. And that really meant a lot to me. And I know that Ryan and I, that this is one of the reasons that we wanted to do our podcast in honor of you, since you have been the man over the last few WrestleMania weekends as far as writing reviews and being so prolific.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's that's the funny thing is like, I got home on a Thursday and I was like, okay, I'm like, I want to get back into doing things. And my wife was like, try not to go too crazy. She's like, I know you were going insane in the hospital and everything. She's like, and I know you want things to kind of feel normal. And I was like, I do. And I got home on a Thursday. And so that next day was like a bunch of WWE releases. And then Impact was on that night. So I kind of ended up throwing into fire. And I just, I started doing stuff again. And it's funny. It actually felt really good. And yeah, Mania weekend was I had a good time as always, but I didn't get to cover quite as much as I wanted. Part of that is just the restrictions as a wheelchair, but yeah, it was an insane WrestleMania weekend. I think there was almost 40 shows if I'm correct, and it's getting crazier by the year, and I pretty much figured it would be that way in New York, but I think we're getting to the point of just too much when you're running shows that have like a crowd of 20 people.
Absolutely, and I think the one good thing about the next 2 years is that if WWE is indeed going to both Tampa and Los Angeles, that is going to preclude a lot of independent companies from being able to go to those two places. So I don't think you're going to see 40 shows running next year, and I think that that is a positive thing because I think the reality is that there are certain companies that are doing very well, and then there are certain companies and promotions that probably have no business being there. And I don't want to get into the specifics of who belongs and who doesn't, because I think you could look at the attendance figures, you can look at the quality of the shows, and those are the folks that deserve to be there and who don't. Like you look at GCW, they deserve to be there. They've proven the last 3 years that they can sell out, that they can run unique shows. They deserve to be there year in and year out. And I think WWN, for the most part, I know their attendance wasn't outstanding, but for the most part, they were also running in Thursday and Friday day time slots. So I think you have to temper your expectations when you're talking about those kinds of places. But I think WWN is fine. I think WrestleCon is generally fine. But then you look at the fact that, there's a couple companies that were running in New York and Queens and stuff, and your Blackcraft Wrestlings. I know that was a kind of a controversial show that ran late Friday night, and I know there was a UK company that ran in New York that drew like 15 people or something like that. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you've got to weed out, and I have a feeling that, like I said, when you're going to Tampa Bay, Florida, and Los Angeles, California, you are not going to get some of that riffraff there.
Yeah, and hopefully that's the case because, I mean, I get it. As everybody sees Mania weekend as this big chance to make money, but the thing is, you you have to put some effort into it. You talked about like the GCW shows that you have Bloodsport and Joey Janela Spring Break, and they're not your everyday wrestling show, so they will stand out. Plus, you have like the fact that Joey Janela has built up a lot of goodwill, the past couple years, and then it showed by the way that they sold out and everything. And then I think it was like IPW is the UK thing with like House of Glory or whatever. But yeah, there's crowd pictures. There's like 15 to 20, 30 people at the most. And apparently there were some decent names on the card, but it's just like, from what I heard, there was almost no advertising for it, that's the other thing too. It's like, if you're to run Mania weekend and there's 80,000 people in town and you don't put a little effort into advertising, you deserve to get 15 to 20 people. And I feel bad saying that because, I want to make sure guys get paid and everything. But yeah, you gotta pick your battles and stuff. And not everybody deserves to run WrestleMania weekend is another thing. It's just, I think because it was in New York was the big thing. And I hope you're right about the next couple years, Tampa and possibly LA, we kind of dial this back. And like you said, WWN is fun because they run their Evolve and their Super Show, and then they helped bring in WXW and DDT. And I know a lot of people love the DDT show, and that's good. That's good that we can bring that other stuff in. But again, you don't need everybody and their fucking mom running the weekend because and it's not even you have to watch everything kind of situation. It's just the fact that there's too much, and it's diminishing returns. And then you have guys who are to work like 7, 8, 9 shows, and then people will wonder like, well, why was their Saturday match no good? Well, it was match 8 or 9, and we saw that a couple years ago. I think a couple years ago it was Elgin was the first one who did like 8 or 9 dates, and everybody was wondering why the last couple matches weren't good. And Ospreay did a lot one year, and it's just like not everybody can keep that level of performance up for 9 matches over 2 or 3 days. It's just not going to happen.
Right. I think the quantity over quality issue is a big part of why I'm very much in favor of tempering down the shows. And I think even within the shows themselves, I know that this has been a topic of conversation, the number of multi-man matches that are taking place. And this is a problem that exists not just on the independent scene, but you saw it in Ring of Honor. Look at the fact that they had 2 triple threat matches and their tag team winner take all match had 8 people in it. The fact that they could still run a 30-man on a Rumble, and then you look at the fact that WWE had the amount of matches that they did, and there were still people that weren't on the show. And a company like Black Label Pro had like 50 or 60 people on the show. It's just too many. And I think the running of too many matches on each show is kind of an issue for some of these companies. Again, not just an independent wrestling problem, but I think the matches, if I were to make a list of my favorite matches from the weekend, a lot of them are going to be singles matches because those are the matches where people really got to showcase themselves. And I know people are always going to cite the Dragon Gate 6-man tag, and that is a great example of a company and a group of 6 people just rising to the occasion. That match was so unique because people had literally never seen the athleticism that those 6 guys could do. This is something that is so common now that it's really hard to do a 6-man tag like that and have a showcase match that actually means something and gets the fans to chant "Please don't stop" or "Fight forever" or whatever. So you're seeing diminishing returns on that. And I think about the fact that the WWN Super Show has the 6-man tag every year, the to honor Dragon Gate, so to speak, and honor the tradition. I mean, how many of those WWN 6-man tags are really memorable and have really stood out? I know that there was the one year with Will Ospreay and Kota Ibushi, but that's really the only one that comes to mind. And even then, I can't really name any of the other competitors in that match. And I almost wonder, like, I look at the WWN Super Show in particular, like, instead of doing those 2 6-man tags, if they were straight up tag matches or singles matches, how much better off would those shows have been? And I think that's true for a lot of the shows. The Ring of Honor show, did we really need a triple threat ladder match, or would it have been better if it was just a one-on-one singles match? Because I look at the best matches on that show, and they were the one-on-one singles matches.
Yeah, and like to your point too, I think it was, according to Arnold Furious, I think it was Pancakes and Pile Drivers that had something like 55 people booked on it, and that's just another one. That's like, you don't need 55 people on a show. And then there was a ton of multi-man matches. So yeah, that goes to your point. And I do agree about the 6-man stuff. I was gonna say it's that everybody wants to emulate that Dragon Gate thing when they came in and did the ROH show. And you have WWN who tries to honor it every year, but as you said, they're not exactly bringing out the best of matches. And I remember the one with Ospreay and Ibushi, and then it's like, that's about it too. I agree. I can't remember through the years them really delivering anything super memorable that essentially everybody else remembers. You know, like the original one. And you're kind of always being an imposter to the throne in that aspect. And it's just, you're not going to catch that lightning in a bottle. And like you said, the main thing with that Dragon Gate thing was nobody was really, this was before everybody had the streaming services, before everything ended up on YouTube, before there was like the Russian YouTube that things would sneak onto. And there was people that saw that Dragon Gate 6-man and were just, had their minds blown because they had never seen that speed, athleticism. And it's just, when you get something that's special like that, of course you want to try to recreate it. But you're not really going to be able to, because everybody has seen so much. I mean, when was the last time that you were like completely wowed over something in wrestling that was like, just felt like new or fresh to you?
I mean, I think the Walter PCO match kind of blew me away last year, and Will Ospreay and Matt Riddle did for very different reasons. But even then, I mean, you're talking about singles matches that took place, so it was just two people in the ring just going at it, and I think that makes such a huge difference in the quality of the matches and just allowing people to really just get down and focus. Because I think when you do the random 6-man tags, I think you lose focus on who's important, what should I be focusing on. And there were certainly a few multi-man matches that I think did have some standout performances. I think about Spring Break 3 Part 1, that multi-man match. I mean, you look at a guy like Shane Mercer from that match, he probably earned himself a few bookings just from his performance in that particular match. Jungle Boy as well is probably somebody who earned his way onto some shows just by being able to perform well. So I think there are certainly exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, I think that is one of the great challenges of the multi-man match, is that you have so many people in the ring. If you're going 6 to 8 minutes, there is no possible way that everybody is going to get a chance to get their stuff in, so to speak. And I think that is a huge problem with a lot of these shows, is that it did not feel like a lot of people had the opportunity to really break out and stand out from the pack. And I think whereas before WrestleMania weekend was the opportunity for certain guys to just really make a statement and say that, you know, they are going to be a huge part of pro wrestling over the next year, it just feels like we're either doing one of three things. Number one, we're showcasing the guys who are already big stars. And not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but Kazuchika Okada won the IWGP title for the 5th time, and that's great. And I really like the match, but that's just going to be one of the many moments that he has during his Hall of Fame career. The second thing that you get is you get kind of this the irony stuff with and Spring Break is kind of guilty of that, and Joey Ryan's penis party and stuff like that. And then I think the third thing is you just get these showcase matches where you're just trying to get everybody onto the card. And I think in an ideal situation, you want to try to get new people over. I thought that is what the whole purpose, or that's what the whole purpose of WrestleMania weekend should be, because you have 80,000 people in your city. This is your opportunity to break some people out. And I just don't know if that happened this year with anyone.
Yeah, looking back over the past few years, you had stuff like, I remember it was a few years ago when like Timothy Thatcher had like a great WrestleMania weekend, and he got like a lot of talk during that. And then like Will Ospreay, Matt Riddle, Zack Sabre Jr. guys like that. Like you said, it was names that like we knew, but a lot of people weren't really paying attention to or watching the companies that they were involved in. And then you had these guys kind of stepping up and taking that opportunity. And a lot of it, again, it goes to your point that, a lot of those guys were WWN guys, and they were getting the chance in singles matches. They were given time to work. They were given time to impress. And like you said, if you're working a 6 or an 8-man match and you only got 6 or 8 minutes, not everybody's going to get their shit in. Not everybody's going to get a chance to shine. It might be a really fun match, but not everybody is getting that chance. And I just, I don't need, like, I tell you what annoys me anymore is when we get a card announced and there's going to be 6 or 7 matches on this card. And then, like, the first 3 matches on the show, none of that shit was announced. And it's like, I don't need a 9 or 10 match show. You still have like 6 or 7 other matches to go, and you're giving me a bunch of shit that I didn't even know was coming. Don't want it. Don't need it. Don't do that to me. And that's like, people are saying like, oh, it seems like the Evolve shows aren't as good as they used to. Is that because of the NXT thing? And it's like, no, that's not it. What happened was the Evolve shows for a while got really good. And then you lost top talent, but they were able to stay really good still. And part of that is because they were working shows that ran about 2 hours, and they would have 5 matches, sometimes 7. And they hit a sweet spot. And the shows moved along well. The matches were good. Felt like the people that needed time got time. Really enjoyable. Now we're doing that thing like last night's show. Like 2 of the first 3 matches weren't advertised. And you're just kind of throwing shit out there. And instead of a tight 5 to 7 match card that lasts a hair over 2 hours, you're getting a 2-hour and 40-minute card that's 9 or 10 matches. And my favorite thing to say is I want more tombstone and less wider. I don't need everything. I don't need it all. I just need the hits. I need the important.
Right. And I think part of that is the fact that there are so many shows, there's so many streaming services now that I think people want to engage with these different products. And I certainly think that if your show is 3 hours long, there has to be a damn good reason that it's 3 hours long. I think certainly WrestleMania weekend or WrestleMania itself, Wrestle Kingdom, fine. If you want to do 4 hours, great. That's your prerogative. But WrestleMania is 8 hours long. It's too long. And I know some people say it's one night only. And I'm like, you know what? You're a company that's supposed to be for families, right? So that is the idea behind WWE now. They have a PG rating. They are for kids. When did WrestleMania end on the East Coast last week?
Almost 12:30.
So what kid is staying up until 12:30 on a school night for WrestleMania? Because my guess is that there were a lot of kids that were at the show that their parents either had to leave early or they were stuck in the rain for another 3 hours because there was no train service. So yes, the WrestleMania is absolutely too long and they need to do something about it. I don't know whether the solution is to make it 2 nights. I don't know whether the solution is to start it earlier, but there is no excuse for your show to be running 8 hours long. People talk about the WWE roster being too big, and that is certainly valid. And I understand wanting to get people onto the card, but at a certain point, you've got to make hard choices. And I think all wrestling companies have to make hard choices in balancing this need to get talent on the show, because I think independent wrestling companies, especially now, are looking to find new talent as so many people have been signed the last year or so. But you also have to understand that people have lives to live and people can take their entertainment dollar in so many directions. You're not just competing with wrestling. You are competing with every entertainment outlet out there that exists, because people can buy streaming services for almost any niche that they want to, whether it's wrestling, whether it's sports, whether it's the entertainment outlets that exist. I mean, Disney Plus just announced their streaming service that's going to have all of the Disney movies. It's going to have 30 seasons of The Simpsons. It's going to have a new Star Wars. It's going to have all the MCU movies. That is what these wrestling companies are competing with. And if you are going to run these marathon shows, and if your company are going to run like every week, then people are going to start picking and choosing. And you have to justify people's not just money, because I think it's less about the money as these streaming services kind of become a catch-all, and it's more about how are people going to be spending their time. And people do not want to spend their time watching an 8-hour WrestleMania. And I think the proof is in the fact that if you look at the ratings for Monday Night Raw, what has generally been the lowest rated hour for that show for the last few years? As a matter of fact, it's hour 3, correct?
Yep.
So that just shows you that people have a proclivity for 2-hour wrestling shows. They want to sit there for 2 hours, watch it, and then move on to something else, whether it's going to bed, whether it's watching something else, or what have you. So to me, if your wrestling show is more than 2.5 hours, you have a problem.
Yeah, and I really do agree with that. I don't think you need to, I don't think you need to go that long. And, we talked about like, a lot of the shows tried to stay under that like 2.5 hour mark over the WrestleMania weekend. And it's like the joke among a lot of the reviewers, like Arnold Furious, Ian Hamilton, and myself, was, you need a 2 hour and 20-minute hard out. Can't get your shit done, you're done. It doesn't matter, your show's over. Turn the electricity off, kick everybody out of the damn building. Just get it done. You don't need to run marathon shows. You don't need to book 50 damn people on your card and have like 18 scramble matches. Just book a card and get it done. You don't need to. More is more. It doesn't mean it's better. And that was like the running theme of WrestleMania weekend. WrestleMania, more is more. They give you all the moments and stuff. Yes, that's nice. It's more about the moments than it is great wrestling. I'm sorry. It's the biggest show in the year for quote unquote the biggest and best company in the world. I want a little bit of great wrestling. I got like one great match that I loved. That's it. Kofi and Bryan. I'm sorry. I'm not fucking sitting there loving Shane McMahon's horrible punches and like throwing 4 stars and everything just because I got a couple moments. I would like some wrestling. Then someone was like, well, you like the G1 show, even though you shit all over Ring of Honor. Yes, I did, because the Ring of Honor portion of the card sucked.
I think that's the general consensus, is that if you take the Ring of Honor out of the G1 Supercard, then it's probably one of the best shows of the year. But the fact that they existed on that show and that's almost a whole separate issue, because I think Ring of Honor has just significant talent problems, and I think they have some issues that are really coming to fruition that have been building for a number of years, and the fact that they have not done a good job of building talent. WWE's problems is that they just have too many wrestlers on their roster, and that that they really need to consider a bloodletting of some sort. And I have a feeling that with All Elite Wrestling being what it is, that there are certain people that are just not going to re-sign. And I think that is the best thing for this industry, because the fact that WWE is able to hoard talent, I think is a major negative, not just for the talent themselves, but I think for the wrestling audience as a whole, because look, not everybody's going to be the WWE champion, but certainly you can look at certain guys on that roster and you can just think to yourself, they deserve something. They deserve to be a regularly featured performer, and they're just not. They're getting stuck in the battle royals, and they're just doing 2 minutes and then they're getting eliminated by Braun Strowman. And that is not a way to live a life, especially if you take pride in your craft. And we're talking about length of shows as people are about to listen to Ryan and I talk for 3 hours, which is great, because the good news is that we spend about 10 minutes on each show except for the Supercard. And so it'll be a fast 3 hours if nothing else. But, it's one time a year, and we promise no more 3-hour shows.
Yeah, plus the other thing is like, you scroll through, there's going to be a lineup here to talk about Beyond and WWXW, Bloodsport, CHIKARA, Black Label Pro, Spring Break, Supercard. Here's the thing. You may have someone listening. They just want to hear about Spring Break. or they just want to hear about the Supercard. You don't have to listen. We're not holding you hostage. But yeah, it'll be a good time. But yeah, the AEW stuff, I everybody's like, why don't you break it down more? And I'm like, well, here's the thing. There's not a lot to break down right now because we don't know specifics regarding the TV deal and stuff. Yes, it sounds like they're going to end up on Turner. Yes, it sounds like there's going to be a 2-hour weekly live show. That's all well and good. The one thing I do really like about the AEW stuff right now is that it's going to give people another place to go. And apparently they're paying really well. And it's forcing WWE to up and pay people really well. And I'm all for the good brothers and sisters getting paid. I don't know about you, Jerome, but I like to see people get paid. I mean, I'd like to get paid too, but I mean, I'm not on the payroll for them. But I mean, I want to see people get paid and people be happy. And I think it's just with the way the wrestling business is at times, we don't see that enough. And any kind of competition, and let me preface this, I'm not saying that anybody's going to quote unquote compete with WWE because it's pretty much impossible. But any kind of perceived competition in this business is good for everybody.
I mean, I think that is a proven fact. If you look at when salaries traditionally went up in the National Football League and the National Basketball Association, it's when there were competing leagues going on. And I think the same is true for wrestling. Think about when people were making the most amount of money. WWE did not even have guaranteed contracts until the 90s, which is completely absurd to me. And the fact that they have guaranteed contracts even to this day is specifically because of the feud/rivalry with WCW. So I'm all in favor of people getting paid. And I think this is a huge deal. And I think when we talk about the potential deal with Turner, this is kind of a new media thing as well, because Turner was just bought by AT&T. They are going to have a streaming service of some sort. They already have HBO Go/HBO Now. They already have Bleacher Report. So this is going to be, I have a feeling, kind of a multi-platform sort of situation. And who knows? There may be the possibility that with AEW, their pay-per-views may be on HBO, and that may be something that wrestling fans either have to invest in or have to consider moving forward, because with Turner owning all of these different outlets and companies and channels now, I mean, this AEW thing could go in a lot of different directions. And again, Bleacher Report, they do a lot of writing and stuff. There's a lot of video content. So this is not just something where they're going to be on Turner for 2 hours a week. If they are having an affiliation with Turner Sports and they have the full weight of Turner Sports behind them, this is going to be a massive deal.
Yeah, and it's really, I find it very interesting because there's a whole generation of fans right now that grew up after ECW and WCW went down. So they've never really seen any kind of competition or any kind of quote unquote war. And please don't talk to me about TNA trying to run Monday night. That was like one of the biggest mistakes they ever made. But the fact is it's fascinating to see how it's going to shake out, how it affects all the companies. And before we break into you and Ryan, one of the things we found out over Mania weekend is Darby Allin done with WWN, done with Evolve, and he signed with AEW. And to me, I think that's a great signing for AEW. And I think it's a huge missed opportunity for WWN.
I think Darby Allin is one of those guys that could really break through if given the opportunity. I don't know if he was ever going to get the kind of opportunities in WWN and by extension WWE, because he is a much smaller guy. I don't know how PG friendly his character is at times. I think him going to a more, let's say, adult and modern pro wrestling company that is going to have the new media aspects to it, the YouTube part, I think it's such a great signing for them. I think it's something that is very underrated by a lot of people. I feel the same way about the Joey Janela signing. I don't know how good Darby Allin and Joey Janela are in the ring, but from a personality standpoint, from a GIF/meme/social media/promotional standpoint, I think those are the kind of signings that are going to separate AEW from just being another TNA or Ring of Honor trying to step up and this being something that is legitimate, because these are guys who I think are legitimate and have their own brands and will bring those brands into AEW and make a huge difference.
Yeah, the Darby Allin thing annoyed me because I do previews and reviews for all the Evolve shows, and there were several times that they could have put the title on him where it made sense in terms of the story and it felt right, and they just didn't do it. And it was constantly a disappointment, and I would constantly say things like, they're going to miss an opportunity. And they ended up missing the opportunity because he's gone. And Janela, when he did his WWN run, was actually really good. He had some great matches. But the other thing is he came in when it was right after Keith Lee and Riddle and Sabre and them were all leaving. And he came in and just felt like a fucking star. So that's the thing, is like, Joey Janela is not like the greatest in-ring technician and grappler, but he has the it thing. He feels like a star, and he can have great matches. So yeah, those are signings I really like, and I'm really interested to see how everything shakes out once we get more details. Because the rumor is, TBS or TNT Tuesday night, 2 hours. And if that's the case, and they're getting good rights fees and they're getting other things with all the online content possible, I'm really interested because we haven't seen anything like this in a long time. And again, I think that's really good.
Well, and plus you think about it, we're going back to TNT, which is where Nitro started, of all things. I am in disbelief that TNT is going back to wrestling after some of the things that they said and some of their attitudes towards it. I guess things really changed over the course of a 17-year period, and what once was kind of the bastard child of the Turner Broadcasting family is now going to be welcomed back with open arms. And I really think a therapist would have a great deal of interest in looking at Cody Rhodes and kind of his daddy issues, and kind of looking at what Cody Rhodes has done between kind of trying to name shows like his father did, trying to run his own company, trying to be a booker, being the NWA champion, going back to Turner Sports. I just think a therapist would have a ton of fun with him.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring it up, because I've thought about it a little bit, but like when you just lay it out like that, it's like, yeah, it's like there's some couch time coming for that young man. There's a lot to talk about, but yeah, I find the whole thing really interesting, and I hope things pan out well, because I'm all for anything that makes the business healthier and gets the guys and girls paid, man, and and plus the thing is like, the TNA thing on Monday night was just a total frazzle and ended up not good. But at the time, it was good for, website business for me, because people wanted to talk about it, and people were, everybody got excited because, oh, it's the Monday Night Wars again. And then it was over in like really fast. So, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm excited. And I just hope everything goes well. So, Jerome, I'm going to wrap our portion up here, and I'm going to turn the show over to you and Ryan. Remember, you can follow the 411 on Wrestling Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, and the 411 site. Please make sure to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, and we appreciate you listening, and I will talk to you probably later this week.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jerome Cusson. I am a former 411 contributor, and I used to help manage a site called Pro Wrestling Ponderings. For a number of years, the person I'm co-hosting with and we have an annual WrestleMania weekend tradition of covering shows. This is a tradition that goes back to 2013 when we were in New Jersey together, and has continued for all but 1 year when I was living in China back in 2017. The official name of this podcast is the Larry Csonka He's Not Dead WrestleMania Weekend Memorial Podcast. Larry is a dear friend and mentor to both Ryan and myself, and when he went through his illness and his issues earlier this year, I was concerned that he would actually miss this weekend. And I know I was prepared to fill in with some reviews. And honestly, the best aspect of this podcast is knowing that Larry is still here, and Larry will be doing reviews, and you can probably go read all of those on 411mania.com. And what we get to do is Ryan and I are going to podcast about some non-WWE related Mania shows, and this podcast is going to be about 3 hours long, but we are going to be reviewing a number of shows from this past weekend, none of which are NXT or WrestleMania. So if you are looking for reviews of those shows, please go elsewhere. We will be reviewing a number of shows. All of the shows listed that we are reviewing will be put into our show notes. Just some information about us where you can find me on social media. You can follow me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can go back and read all of my match reviews, even for some of the shows that we are not talking about on this podcast, at JeromeReviewsStuff.wordpress.com, and the link to that will be also in the show notes. My co-host is Ryan Rozanski, and again, we've been doing this for a number of years. You can follow him on Twitter at @RRozanski. And his reviews can still be found on pwponderings.com. Ryan, here we are. We are doing another WrestleMania weekend, and it just feels like everything is still the same.
It does. Of course, as we talked about for a 10-year podcast for Pro Wrestling Ponderings, I started writing about pro wrestling when I was 17, and I don't think there's a better gauge of how old you're getting when you're able to just like track your stamina through WrestleMania weekend, because it's not a weekend anymore. It is almost a week. This first show that we're going to be talking about is on Wednesday night, and it's just amazing what this has all become over the years.
This is a weekend where there are over 35 professional wrestling shows across 3 states. If you count Beyond Wrestling running in Massachusetts, that is 3 states, plus New York, plus New Jersey. A wide range of shows have taken place over these last few days. But I do want to get to some opening talking points before we get into the fact that we did watch some shows. We are going to review them. But what you're talking about is the fact that there are too many shows. This is something that has been a huge talking point. There are some 35 wrestling shows in about 7 days, again, encompassing 3 states. And I think this is so much of an issue for people because there are not as many wrestlers on the independent scene and even in the kind of Ring of Honor New Japan sphere as there have been in recent years, because of the fact that WWE and NXT are consuming so much talent at this point. And even companies like Progress Wrestling, which have run the last couple of years, are choosing not to run WrestleMania weekend. But just about everyone is, from AIW to Black Label Pro to the usual suspects like Evolve and Ring of Honor. So Ryan, the fact that there are 35 shows in 7 days means that we are going to be able to review all 35 of them, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I honestly, I'd go crazy. I mean, I would. I don't think I can watch that many MJF matches. I mean, nothing against him. I don't know if I can watch that many of anyone's matches. It's gotten to the point where I think, and look, I don't think it's wrong necessarily for as many promotions to get in on this WrestleMania weekend as possible. If a promotion thinks that they're going to make money or increase their exposure by running on WrestleMania weekend, I think more power to them. But I think these promotions have to understand that the more shows that are happening, the less interest that I have to go around, right? And I always say the burden is on the fan to be interested in a show. These promotions have to make fans interested in the shows. So it's just a thing where the more there are, a fan's attention span, a fan's interest is going to get stretched even further. And I know for you and I think I can speak for you, my attention span has been stretched pretty thin over the past, especially this weekend, again, starting on Wednesday, going through Sunday.
I mean, you are talking about a situation where we did start on Wednesday with the one show for Beyond Wrestling. We're talking about Thursday. We're watching 3 and 4 shows. Friday is 3 and 4 shows. Saturday was only 2 shows, but those were the ones that were they were both evening shows. Ring of Honor running 4.5 to 5 hours, followed immediately by Spring Break 3 Part 2. So just a ton of stuff going on. And I think part of what happens then is it's quantity over quality. When you have somebody like Ethan Page wrestling 9 times in 3 days, and you have so many of these wrestlers that are competing on multiple shows per day, there is no possible way that you're going to be able to get the best effort out of them. And what ends up happening is that you get a lot of tag team matches, you get a lot of multi-man matches, and I think that those are matches that people are not necessarily interested in seeing. Because when I think about the very best of WrestleMania weekend, I think about the Evolve and Ring of Honor shows from years ago when guys only had 2 or 3 matches in a weekend. But when guys have 9 matches in a weekend, it is really difficult to get a lot of Match of the Year candidates.
It definitely is. And I was trying to think about what I remember from last year's WrestleMania weekend. I really honestly only remember about 2 things that happened on the independent shows. One was the Matt Riddle-Will Ospreay match, which I absolutely loved, mainly because I think it was around 12 minutes, and I ended up rewatching that a few times. But the other is a little more depressing. It was just how long that Ring of Honor show went last year. And I believe it was almost directly at midnight Eastern. Cody Rhodes hit a Canadian Destroyer on Kenny Omega, and it was just like such a depressing scene. You know, I'm watching Cody Rhodes hit a Canadian Destroyer. It's midnight, and there was still, of course, a Ring of Honor World Title match to follow that. So, I honestly, for all that has happened, I mean, more is happening on these WrestleMania weekends, but I feel like I'm remembering less. And that's not a good sign.
Right, and I think part of what also hurt the distinctiveness of this weekend is the fact that there was supposed to be a number of Dragon Gate wrestlers, including Pac, including Masato Yoshino and Yamato, as they were booked mostly on the WrestleCon shows, but I do know that Jonathan Gresham was supposed to wrestle Yoshino on the Black Label Pro show, and unfortunately there were some visa issues, something that happened to New Japan last year, so they all had to be pulled off of the WrestleCon shows, and I know that that is something that has undoubtedly hurt this weekend just a little bit, because they certainly would have added some variety and some freshness to some of these cards.
I think it's even more devastating when you have a scenario where a lot of these promotions are relying pretty heavily on these showcase matches, these kind of matches between 2 wrestlers that you never thought you would see wrestle each other. So when you're relying a lot on these exhibition showcase matches, and less on your promotion's storylines and such, when visa issues happen to a lot of these Dragon Gate guys this year, for instance, it hurts the shows a lot more. And yeah, it is an unfortunate thing. I can't really speak to the visa issue legally. It seems like WrestleCon in particular spent a lot of money with legal fees and everything to try to get these Dragon Gate guys over here. And it just seems like a big mess, and it's a really it was an unfortunate situation. I love Dragon Gate. That was a lot of fresh matchups that we're not going to see.
Certainly, and there is a glut of multi-man matches. This is something that permeates WrestleMania itself with multiple 4 corners matches, battle royals. The main event is a triple threat match. You also look at the fact that Ring of Honor has a ladder match that we're going to be talking about later on. Just a glut of multi-man matches, and it's really hard for people to stand out in these kinds of matches. And I think the other aspect of the multi-man match that I think connects to what you have been talking about for months and for years now is this idea of quantity over quality, and the fact that there is a lack of storytelling, because I think when you incorporate multiple people or multiple teams in a match, it really disrupts the stories that are involved, and I think you lose that sense of a one-on-one battle. And to be honest with you, I think the matches that have stood out the most over WrestleMania weekend have been either singles matches or like your 6-man tags from Dragon Gate, where there's at least a clear line between who the factions are in those matches. But how many multi-man matches have really stood out over WrestleMania weekend? Because I'm having a hard time thinking of any.
Yeah, I think we found ourselves kind of flipped from what things were 10 to 15 years ago, because the first Dragon Gate 6-man tag was on Supercard of Honor in 2006, and perhaps one of the reasons that match stood out and is still talked about today is because that kind of match was not the norm, whether it be on WrestleMania weekend shows or just on regular shows. Ring of Honor wasn't doing a ton of 6-man tag team matches back in 2006. Now we find ourselves in a situation where it almost seems like the multi-man match is the norm. And when you have a singles match like from last year, Will Ospreay against Matt Riddle, that is just very, very good, that tends to stand out because it was just a one-on-one match. And I think, and to give another example of something that a lot of people were talking about last year going into the weekend, was that Kenny Omega-Cody Rhodes match, where it was just a well-built singles match, which ended up being very rare in 2018 and 2019. So a lot of people were looking forward to that. I think coming into this weekend, like one of the matches I'm most looking forward to is Walter against Pete Dunne on NXT, and that just seems to me like a very well-built-up singles match. And I think those are becoming increasingly rare. And I think you're right. I mean, for whatever reason, we love these 6-man tag team matches that you just know are going to have about 10 to 15 minutes of pretty inconsequential action leading to this crazy finishing stretch. And, we're going to make, 5-second clips of it to put on Twitter. And it just seems like that's the direction we're headed. That is the desirable thing to do.
And I think you almost saw that a little bit in the Beyond show that we're going to talk about in just a minute, even though it wasn't like the craziness. I think they were still kind of trying to capture that in the Team Pazuzu versus SCU match. And of course, because of Spring Break and Joey Janela, because those shows have worked out so well, people have kind of lost why those matches have worked in a lot of cases, and we're getting Swoggle on multiple shows. And I don't know Swoggle personally. I've heard very positive things about him as a human being, but I have zero interest in watching him wrestle Scott Steiner, wrestle Nick Gage. That is not something that I am into, and the fact that he is booked on so many shows, I think, speaks to the issues that WrestleMania weekend has with quantity over quality, and I also think it speaks to the issue of what bookers are trying to do when they're booking WrestleMania weekend, because I don't know if there is any storytelling that is going on whatsoever. And I think that, for me, is a huge problem. And there's other irony matches. I mean, the Joey Ryan card is a blatant ripoff of Spring Break, and you can look at a lot of the matches on that card to see it. The Orange Cassidy card, which admittedly was thrown for a loop because of what happened to Nova Pro, but even that card just had a lot of matches where it was about the irony and it wasn't really about anything else.
There's a phrase in law, it's a Latin phrase, I'll mispronounce it, so the English of it is, it speaks for itself. And when you present me something like Scott Steiner against Swoggle, and I ask you, well, why should I care about that match? I feel like the response would just be, well, it speaks for itself. I mean, just look at who's involved. And what I want to say is that's not enough to get me interested. Like, if the only reason I should be interested in a match is because of the identity of the people in it, and that is completely it, then you're taking a gamble on whether or not fans will be interested in it or not. I think the more reasons you can give fans, the more you can do on your end as a promotion to make fans interested in something, it's going to lead to just more interest. And I don't think we're alone in not being overly enthusiastic for Hornswoggle against Scott Steiner. And if all they've done so far to build that match is just to present the names of who's going to be involved, I think that's lazy, and I also don't think they should be surprised if a lot of people just aren't interested in it.
And to be fair, there are a number of promotions that have booked Swoggle. This is not just an AIW problem. Black Label Pro has done it. A number of companies have done this, and I guess it really does kind of speak for itself. So I think we've kind of hit some of the opening talking points, and the first show that I want to talk about is Beyond Wrestling, because they put on their first weekly show that is going to be streaming on independent wrestling television every Wednesday at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And if you go to IWTV, you can get 20 days free if you enter a code, or you can order and get to see the show for $9.99 a month. And I tried to approach this like a first-time viewer, and I don't know what you think of this, Ryan, but in the overall sense, if you were coming into Beyond Wrestling for the first time and you watched this show, did this show make you want to watch Beyond Wrestling Uncharted next week?
I would say overall no. I think that, if I'm a first-time viewer, which I think, to be fair, I think the most frequent. I think if you are going to have a show that's going to have the most first-time viewers, it's probably going to be WrestleMania weekend, if any. So I think that's a fair kind of perspective to look at this. I would say no. I mean, if I'm a first-time viewer, a lot of what I look for is at least some nuance in the storytelling. And I know there is this tension between storytelling and presenting, just intriguing matchups on these cards. But the only traces I saw of just some kind of history and storyline that they were building off of was in the main event with David Starr and Joey Janela. But, I mean, aside from that, this was just a lot of showcase matches, and I don't know. I mean, the most exciting thing to me about this show was the enthusiasm of the crowd. And that was probably, as if I had never seen Beyond before, I would have been really impressed at, how vocal the crowd was, how much they knew about the wrestlers and stuff like that. It wasn't really anything that was happening in the ring.
I think in a lot of cases, what I find with wrestling shows is that a bad crowd hurts a good show. This is one of those cases where I think the crowd elevated a mediocre show. And I think they wanted to love this show, and I think in a lot of cases they elevated some of the matches. And just to kind of get into things, they started off by having SoCal Uncensored versus Team Pazuzu. Team Pazuzu is Chris Dickinson, Santana, and Ortiz. And most likely because of the AEW connection, you can't really have SoCal Uncensored lose. So they got the victory thanks to David Starr interfering. And this was the first time the heels won. The heels won 5 of the 7 matches on the show, which is probably not the ideal way to start. There was a lot of chicanery throughout the evening, and that was also represented in the next match with MGF versus Kimberly. MGF is kind of a divisive figure in the wrestling world. I think there are a lot of people who really like his character. He gets a ton of heat. I am definitely not sold as him as a wrestler, especially after what was a relatively short and inconsequential match against Kimberly. And then there was a tag match with the Beaver Boys and Aussie Open that I think was very good at times, but I think the match ultimately ended up going too long. And I'm not quite sure why the Beaver Boys had to win, especially when there was this moment when Mark Davis just hits this one-arm powerbomb, which is one of the most impressive things I've ever seen, and he seemingly set up to do something really cool on Alex Reynolds, and then it just dies, and then the Beaver Boys just kind of win. So these first 3 matches were very disappointing in a way, mostly because I think of the finishes in all 3.
I think so, and one of the trends on this show for me was kind of a disconnect between the commentary and what was happening in the ring. Now, I understand as commentators, your job is to make the action look as good as possible and hype things. I understand that, but this commentary team in particular was very hyperbolic in terms of how much they loved what was happening in the ring, and it was just a fact that in especially the opener and the Aussie Open against Beaver Boys tag team match, that the action just wasn't the cleanest throughout, especially in the opener. There was a lot of times where just some exchanges just did not go well, and there were some awkward moments. And to the crowd's credit, there were no negative chants. They didn't harp on any of those moments of miscommunication, so that was good. But commentary, if I was listening to commentary and just not watching the show, I would have thought, just based off commentary's reaction, that these first 3 matches were just insane, that this was the must-watch pro wrestling episodic weekly TV show that I need to see, and they just really weren't. I think the Aussie Open against Beaver Boys match was probably the best here of the first 3 matches. It did go around 16 minutes, and I don't know. I mean, I think the thing that the Aussie Open against Beaver Boys match did well is they were very set on doing cool spots, but I just think there was enough just natural talent that they just made it work to the largest extent. So yeah, I mean, it was an okay start to the show.
I think Mark Davis in particular is the person who really stood out in these three matches. I think he came across like the biggest star, both literally and figuratively, just because of what he was able to do, his presence. So he was definitely somebody that stood out to me, and is definitely someone that I hope that we get to talk a little bit more about as we go through the rest of this podcast. And I notice MJF is not someone you really mentioned. What do you think of him? Is he somebody who you see as a potential star because obviously an AEW contracted wrestler, or is he somebody who you need to see more before you make kind of a full judgment?
I actually have not seen him wrestle all that much. I mean, I watched the kind of weekly AEW YouTube series, and he's being more prominently featured there. I think in terms of just a promo, he's pretty good. So I think he has the character down. I don't know, because I haven't seen enough of him, how nuanced his character is. I mean, if he really is just a jerk, I guess that's fine. That's not overly interesting, but it seems like he could pull off something interesting if it's not already there. I think probably what I would have to do is watch his CZW stuff. I don't know if he's still heavily involved in CZW, but I know he was for quite a while. And that would probably be the best indication of things. I'd probably have to see more on him.
Right, and I agree. The match with Kimberly did not overly impress me, and again, the finish was just kind of wonky. There were two wrestlers who I'd never seen before and were kind of treated as very new talent as Beyond Wrestling is going with the concept of a Discovery Gauntlet. The idea is two wrestlers compete and the winner advances to the following week to wrestle another new person, which is, I think, relatively simple. Also something that I think is relatively interesting, because what this means is by doing this Discovery Gauntlet, you are guaranteed to see one new wrestler a week. I think that is a huge positive. And even if, look, there are going to probably be some of these matches that are complete duds, but I appreciate the fact that they are going to showcase new talent through this. And Mick Moretti and Gabriel Sky were the two wrestlers that were featured. Mick Moretti got the victory, so he will be wrestling next week on Uncharted. I think it was interesting that Gabriel Sky is actually the one who got the pre-match promo, but Mick Moretti got the win and the post-match promo. Moretti definitely came across as being very unique, but I kind of wish he would get some new gear. But this was fine. Like, it wasn't great, but I am very much in favor of this, and I think this might be actually one of the strongest elements of the show, because it seemed like there was a clear purpose to it.
See, I actually 100% agree with you, and I don't know if we are in the minority here, but yeah, I thought the idea of a Discovery Gauntlet was the most intriguing part of the show. I mean, it was the match itself certainly wasn't positioned to be the most intriguing part of the show, but I mean, at least it was a nod to the fact that, hey, we have a weekly thing now, and here's something that you can expect to see every week. Because I think aside from this, all they really announced was, I think, a tag team match with Sadconf, and then an appearance by Gangrel next week, if I remember correctly. So
Gangrel, who is better now than he was in his prime, according to Josh Briggs.
One thing I would like to see from commentary, and this will never happen, but when you make a claim like that, if that claim ends up not being true, you must answer for it. Right? Like, if Gangrel comes out next week and doesn't, of course, I don't know how Gangrel was in his prime. So, maybe the bar is not that high. But, I would just like to reflect on that statement, at some point. But yeah, I think this gauntlet idea is fine. I'm glad it wasn't an actual gauntlet with, 10 people. Because when they first announced that there's, on the show, that there's going to be a gauntlet, I about had a heart attack. I was ready to message you on Facebook and just say, what did we get ourselves into? I'm expecting a 10-person gauntlet with Facade at the end or something. So I'm glad it was just one singles match.
And then, speaking of high flyers, you mentioned Facade. We're talking about two high flyers that are actually good. That would be Chris Stadlander, who I'd never seen before wrestling AR Fox. Stadlander has a very solid reputation in Beyond Wrestling, and she has beaten a number of prominent competitors, including John Silver, and she got the win here with a roll-up over AR Fox in what was a good match. Not a great one, I would say. I think that a lot of the physicality was impressive, a lot of great athleticism. AR Fox is somehow able to still be a heel while also doing all of his cool stuff. And I thought I liked this for what it was, but I don't know. The roll-up finish, it is what it is. Fox's shoulders were barely down, and it came off more like a fluke. And then after the match, Kimberly comes out seemingly to save Stanlander. They are going to be a tag team on one of the many millions of shows that take place over the weekend. And then she just does a heel turn after, I guess, MJF alluded to Kimberly being replaced on the Beyond Wrestler, as being replaced as Beyond's top wrestler. That's the thing that happened, Ryan.
Yeah, I'll make this brief because I'm going to rant a little and I'll make it brief. But basically, commentary before this match started, I forget who said it, but one of them said, "I'm calling it now. This is going to be match of the year." Now, fine, but I think it's important to understand why that person said that, because AR Fox and Chris Statlander, they don't have any history. There's no storyline here. Why would someone claim that this is going to be match of the year? Because they both can do flips. They both can do cool moves. And I keep repeating, this is where we're headed in independent wrestling. It's not about the story. It's not about build-up. It's just about getting the right combination of wrestlers that can do cool moves together and making magic that way. I mean, that is the reality in 2019. The idea that match of the year was even said, let alone before anything happened with regards to this match, is alarming to me. The match was fine. The finish kind of sucked, but it was okay.
I mean, I think what you end up with is you get an athletic spot fest like what you saw with that match, or it's about the comedy, and that's what you got in the next match with Orange Cassidy and Session Moth Martina was his mystery partner as they wrestled Jordynne Grace and Brian Cage. And this match was specifically designed so Jordynne Grace could pin Orange Cassidy and get a shot at the independent wrestling title. That is exactly what happened, as this match is kind of a mess, and part of that is because Martina is just bizarre, and I'm not sure that she is for everyone. She is an acquired taste, so to speak. Orange Cassidy developed into one of the better talents on the independent scene, and the fact that he has the independent wrestling title, I think, speaks to that. And he's probably one of the more underrated guys, and I really like Jordynne Grace. I think she has also developed into one of the best wrestlers going right now, and Brian Cage collected a paycheck.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the interesting part about this match was just kind of how untouchable Orange Cassidy is to the Beyond crowd. I mean, Jordynne Grace is awesome. She is incredible. And she pinned Orange Cassidy, and there was mainly boos, right? And I would have to believe the Beyond crowd does like Jordynne Grace, but Orange Cassidy is a god to them. And, yeah, I mean, Orange Cassidy is a lot of fun. I think they probably teamed Cassidy and Martina with the idea of them kind of being equal in the way they present their comedy. I don't think they were equal at all. I think it's very easy to get engaged with Orange Cassidy. It was very hard for me to get behind Session Moth Martina's stuff. It was an okay match. I probably expected more going in, but after I saw the partners, it was what it was.
Right, and then there was the main event, David Starr, Masato Tanaka, and they wrestled this like it was the first match of 8 or 9 that they were going to have over the weekend. I think it was perfectly acceptable. I think Masato Tanaka is an easy guy to get behind. I think he's a very emotional guy. David Starr is probably another one of those guys, probably even higher on the list than both Jordynne Grace and Orange Cassidy on the list of best independent wrestlers. But you really didn't get a satisfying ending here because, as far as from a match telling standpoint, the crowd loved the fact that Joey Janela came out, gave a low blow to David Starr. Tanaka hits Starr with a chair and gets the win. But this was yet another match where you had a ref bump, and then you had a not so clean finish. And I understand that you do have a weekly television show now, and you are trying to get a hook for the week to week, but it just seemed like there were far too many matches on the show that had either chicanery or some sort of a screwball finish.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that, just so it doesn't come off like we're complaining about everything, I think you and I would agree that if this was the only screwball finish on the show, it would have been really well done. Because the Joey Janela pop, when he came out, was definitely worth it. My complaint is that this wasn't the first ref bump on the show. So the rest of the card made the finish in the main event not as satisfying, because it wasn't the first time we've seen this chicanery on the show. If it would have been the first time we'd seen it, awesome. I would have liked this match a lot more. As it stands, I think the match was very good. I agree that they wrestled it like it was, one of 8, but I think they're good enough that they're still able to deliver a good match. I think given the rest of the card, we would have needed a great match to an excellent match to even think about recommending this show. But clearly the match of the night, and, the Joey Janela return is exciting. So they ended on a high note, but I think this one needed to be much better to get this show off the ground.
I almost wonder if they should have waited until next week to perhaps start, but there's also the argument that this is the way that you kick off WrestleMania weekend. So I certainly see the argument for that. All right, let us move on from Beyond Wrestling. Going into Thursday, I was regretting my life choices at this point after the very frustrating Beyond Wrestling show. And I'm not going to say that the Independent Wrestling.tv family reunion show completely restored my faith in wrestling, but there was just enough good on the show to give me some confidence that the rest of the weekend would have some noteworthy things. And again, I think that this is kind of a 2 or 3 match show in a sense, because I think you did have a lot of the same problems with a lot of showcase matches from different promotions, but you also had, I think, a couple of very noteworthy singles matches as well.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm quite as optimistic about this show as you. I liked the main event quite a bit, which was a last man standing match between Jake Parnell and Gary Jay. I thought they did a really good job. I don't think it was really enough to save the show, but I think maybe one point of disagreement we might have is on Orange Cassidy this weekend, and maybe that's something worth discussing. He opened the show defending the Independent Wrestling.tv title against Jonathan Gresham. Now, throughout the shows we watched this weekend, we saw Orange Cassidy quite a bit, and I think my main issue with Orange Cassidy at this point is that a lot of his matches feel very similar. And so while him and Jonathan Gresham, I think, had some good exchanges here and there, it was, to me, just the very typical Orange Cassidy match. And I think in this opener, especially when he's in there with Jonathan Gresham, I think one of the strengths of Orange Cassidy, right, is that he presents an interesting, unique challenge to everyone who he wrestles. And he does a few things almost every match. He'll do the thing where he puts his hands in his pocket. There's almost some play with his sunglasses. But I think if Orange Cassidy is going to have any longevity over multiple years with what he is doing, he has to be able to kind of hit roadblocks, I think, where the hands in the pockets aren't going to work and his usual antics just aren't going to work. And I think Jonathan Gresham would have been the perfect opponent for him to kind of hit a brick wall and have to, I guess, just reorganize or adapt. And it just felt like the normal Orange Cassidy match. Now, I agree that his match against Jonathan Gresham was better than his match against Brian Alvarez, on another show we watched, but it seems too similar to me, and I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I agree with you that by the time you're watching this for a third time when he's wrestling Taka Michinoku on the Spring Break show, I do think that there is some level of repetition there that is not good and is not conducive to a good weekend. But I think taking that all out of context, I think that I really enjoyed this match because I don't think it necessarily made Jonathan Gresham look stupid. I just think it made Orange Cassidy look really smart. And I appreciated the fact that this was not your typical opener. It was something very different, opening with a championship match, which I think is kind of a mixed bag because there were actually a number of promotions that started their shows by having their championships defended. This is something that Black Label Pro and Shimmer also did. Here, I think I could understand it a little bit more because I think Cassidy and Gresham serves as a very solid opener. And I guess we kind of disagree. But I do agree with you that Orange Cassidy certainly, it got a little bit repetitive at times. I also want to mention the last man standing match because the Gary J. Jake Parnell feud is something that has been going on across the Midwest and some of the Southern promotions for the last year or two. And these two are just very, very underrated and very good. And I think when people ask me, what do I want to see out of WrestleMania weekend, this is the kind of match that I want to see. I want to see a singles match where there is a story, where there is a rivalry. And even if I don't have the full context of that rivalry, if you have commentators like Kevin Ford and Dylan Waco, again, those two are close personal friends of mine, but don't let that color my commentary on this, because I think they were both very good at getting across the story. It was violent, but it didn't feel egregious, and you could get the sense that they really did not like each other, and the fact that they have really good chemistry. I really, really liked this last man standing match, and if you are not an Orange Cassidy person, I think that's understandable. This is definitely a match that I would go out of my way to see, particularly if you have an IWTV subscription or if you got the show as part of the fight package. If you have those two things, you have no excuse. Go watch this match immediately, because I think it is legitimately one of the best matches of the weekend. I know it's easy to kind of get lost in the bubble of independent wrestling and saying what's good and what's bad, but this match was really, really good, and I would recommend people check it out.
Yeah, I like the match too. I think it's interesting now, kind of how the metrics of recommending a show has changed so much, because either some people just might already have a subscription or have bought, the collective package, as you say. So sometimes recommending a match is just a matter of, is it worth your time, rather than is it worth your money? And those are two very different questions. But now with subscriptions, a lot of that changes. I do wonder, though, and this is something I saw all weekend, I wonder if promotions, if there's going to be a move towards using doors instead of tables. I saw a lot of people get put through doors this weekend, which, look, if it's safer and it's cheaper, I don't think, like, aesthetically, I think it looked just as good as being put through a table. But I wonder the metric, like the dynamics of that. Like, are doors just easier on the wrestlers? Because if so, that's great. It's a good innovation. I was just very curious by the amount of doors that got broken this weekend.
And this was something that was collective specific, because the Ring of Honor was using tables, but throughout all of the collective shows, it was doors. Whether it was IWTV, AIW, it was just doors. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic that I had not really thought of before. But of course, I think if it's easier on the wrestlers, if it is cheaper, then as far as I'm concerned, just do it, because we don't really, the only purpose of breaking a table is for the sound and for the aesthetics. And if you're getting the same thing from the door, there's absolutely no reason to think otherwise. A couple of the other matches that I at least wanted to point out were the freelance wrestling. They had a showcase tag team match. Kylie Ray and Isaiah Velasquez defeated Shotzi Blackheart and Robert Anthony. We're going to talk a little bit more about Shotzi Blackheart later when we talk about the WWN Super Show. I think she was a pretty solid performer across this weekend. Kylie Ray is the freelance champion. It feels like she got stuck in a lot of tag team matches this weekend, but I know that she is kind of the queen of the Midwest right now. And I really like this tag match because there were only 4 people as opposed to 6 or 8. I really liked that Robert Anthony was kind of the base for everybody else. But Frank the Clown became involved, and it just completely ruined my enjoyment of this match. And I know that Frank the Clown is a very divisive figure. I just don't understand why Freelance would allow this person to be a part of this match when they are trying to put their best foot forward.
Yeah. I want to address that. I do want to say, though, that although, like you mentioned, Ring of Honor did not put any people through doors, they also didn't open very many doors with their show.
Bada bing! That's a good one. 45 minutes in, and that's a banger.
Yeah, please don't edit that out. No, you're right about the tag team match, and I think that your criticism of the interference finish is almost doubly true based on the idea that Freelance and all these promotions were coming together to kind of put their best foot forward by offering a match to try to garner new support or new eyes. And I think you saw that with the Action Wrestling title match where AC Mack defended against Fred Yehi, and there was a low blow finish, and the interference, like you said, in Kylie Ray's tag team match. Robert Anthony is someone who I was kind of excited to see because I remember his work as Egotistico Fantastico from years and years ago, and I always liked him in the ring, so it was cool to see him pop up. I think this show as a whole, though, you definitely got to see a lot of different wrestlers and maybe some wrestlers that you've never seen or haven't seen in a while. I don't know if anyone really took advantage of their opportunity, though, aside from Gary Jay and Jake Parnell in the main event. I mean, that is what stands out. And if I was talking about this show to someone, I would pretty much just recommend to watch that match. I mean, there was some solid action throughout, but it almost seems like, and we'll talk about this probably with other shows, just the layouts, the number of people involved in every match, all this feels like it could have been done a little more responsibly to let more people stand out. So, I think it was, I like this idea for a show, but I think everything just has to be a little more cohesive in terms of how everything's laid out.
And that is something that we're going to get to in just a few minutes. But I also want to point out that for all the issues that the Action Wrestling Championship match had, the one thing I really did appreciate was the promo that AC Mack cut before the bout, because I think so many times you get these guys that kind of run together. AC Mack is a guy who really stood out because he cut not just a promo, but he cut a really good promo, and those are something that is something that is very difficult to see on a lot of independent wrestling shows. But it was something that I appreciated, and I give a ton of respect for, because it's not easy to be in a completely new atmosphere and to be able to do those kinds of things. So I give a lot of props to AC Mack for that promo. Even if the match wasn't great, I did want to point that out.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of this is just trying to figure out what I would recommend to someone who, like you said, has either bought the show or hasn't bought the show yet and is wondering whether or not to buy it. And I think his promo, for instance, if you really liked it, that is where he was able to succeed on this show, right? That's where he was able to stand out, because his match was 6 minutes and had a low blow finish. So there's only so much he can control, and it seemed like the promo was the most that he could control in terms of standing out. So, if he took advantage of that, that's great. I don't know if there's a lot more to say about this show. I think really the main events, pretty much carried things. I don't think this was a very well-rounded show, but not an idea that I would be opposed to trying again next year. If you have enough promotions that don't have enough of a presence to have their own show, but want to showcase their wrestlers, I think this is fine.
I think the lesson is, just like so many of the other shows that we're going to be discussing, don't have 85 people on the show. Book a solid 20 to 30, do some singles matches. And to me, if you are going to do a show like this, as in my view, what I think you want to do is as a promotion, you want to think 1 year from now, what are the issues that I want to have settled over the course of WrestleMania weekend? And I don't know if this is going to be your biggest show of the year, but I think from a logical standpoint, if you are an independent company, you need to be thinking right now what you're going to do 1 year from now. And that can be difficult with guys being signed on a consistent basis, but to me, there is no reason that you cannot identify two people that can have a rivalry that extends until April of 2020.
Yeah. I agree. I think, and I honestly, just reviewing my notes for the show, I completely forgot Ophidian was on this show. It's amazing. Like this show happened on Thursday, and I forgot that Ophidian was on the show. It was the only time I believe I saw Ophidian all weekend, and he was on the show in his six-way. So yeah, I mean, you definitely want to maximize the probability that people will remember your match on a show like this, and I don't know if that was happening, but I think we can move on.
All right, let's talk about WXW's Amerika ist Wunderbar, and this is the show that Ryan was very much interested in reviewing, and I kind of let him have this one, and I have very few regrets because I really like this show. I know that there was some kind of negative feedback about this. I don't know whether it's kind of the WWN stink, the poor lighting that I think affected all of the WWN shows, but I really enjoyed the show overall, and in my mind, I think all the championship matches were good, if not great. Emil Satoshi defeating Marius Alani. I really enjoyed that match. Emil Satoshi is a guy that, he doesn't have a lot of personality, but I think he's just really good in the ring. And I think him as kind of the shotgun champion, the second level champion, is kind of the perfect role for him. The WXW World Tag Team title match, Aussie Open, who I was very impressed with at Beyond Wrestling, and I think they got a much better chance to showcase themselves against a really good American tag team, the Workhorsemen, Anthony Henry and JD Drake. I think they're a really good team, and I think JD Drake in particular had a couple of other really good, outstanding performances. And look, I really like the WXW Unified Championship match. I had never really seen a lot of Bobby Guns before, but just like the Last Man Standing match, I thought it was unique because it wasn't high flying. It was Guns kind of being very intelligent and working a solid technical wrestling match against Shigehiro Irie. And I just really appreciated what they went for. This is certainly not a match that is going to be for everybody, but I think it was just extremely well executed. And Erie is another guy who I just thought had a really solid weekend. I have not yet watched the DDT show as of this recording, but I plan on doing that. I think Erie had a really good weekend, and I think WXW put a really solid foot forward.
Yeah, I wanted to add this show to the lineup because I think it is something to be aware that, WXW is happening, and they run shows very, very consistently. I think you could go online and look up their streaming service or their video on demand service, and they release new shows maybe every other week. I mean, they do a lot of shows, and it seems like the streaming service that they have is very good. It's very well produced, and so if this is a company that interested you, you could conceivably follow it. And they do, I think, put their best foot forward in terms of telling stories. And yeah, I just think there was a lot of unique talent here. I agree with you about Bobby Guns and Shigehiro Irie. I mean, Irie is someone who I've seen before, and it's almost interesting because I see Irie very randomly pop up on different shows, almost just as like a special guest. It was cool to see him in his home promotion. And everything was, I think, pretty solid here. You had LAX in the opener. You had Jordan Grace have a singles match. Darby Allin showed up early in the card. It felt like a good mix of probably familiar faces to the normal independent wrestling fan that has never seen WXW, but also you had your WXW regulars. I think Aussie Open, to me, is one of the talents that stood out the most this weekend. I was very unaware of them coming in. And especially Mark Davis, right, one half of Aussie Open, who is just a very big man who just has a presence about him that I think is just you could do a lot with. So from a general perspective, I think the show succeeded. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if any of the matches were absolutely spectacular or must-see, but I think from a general point of view, this show did its job.
Right, and I want to mention Jordan Grace because she was a late add to this show. And I'm not going to sit here and say that she had some of the best matches of the weekend, but the way that she carried herself throughout every show that I saw her on, you can tell that she is and is going to be a very big star in the very near future because she just gets better with every match. I think she has a great look. And as far as I'm concerned, she is definitely somebody that is going to be carrying independent wrestling, not just on the female side, but just as a general rule. I look at Jordan Grace, and I see somebody who is going to be a superstar in pro wrestling. And if you had told me when she was doing one-shots for AEW when she was like 15, 16 years old, I would have told you were crazy, but she has really put the work in the last few years, and she should be rewarded for it as far as I'm concerned. I thought the match with You, spelled Y-U-U, I thought the match was good, but I just think the way that she carries herself is first class, and you can tell the difference between the people who are really taking this seriously and the people who maybe are not taking it so seriously. Jordan Grace is taking herself very seriously.
I think you're 100% correct. I think the idea of taking herself seriously is a good point, and it's clear that she does. You should also mention that she is 23. She's 23 years old, which is just insane. I mean, given how good she is, and I was really introduced to her through Nova Pro, and it's very good that she is getting more opportunities. I think she has signed to Impact Wrestling. Yeah, I mean, she's pretty much someone who I think you could pretty much put her in there with anyone, and it will be it will be solid, right? I very rarely have seen her have a bad match regardless of opponent. So, and you know, you was more than game here. Probably something we should talk about. And the match that I really liked was David Starr against the Lucky Kid. This to me had a certain intensity about it. It went about 15 minutes, but you know, I liked it. It was just fun. They had good chemistry together. Lucky Kid again is someone who you might not be aware of had you not been watching WXW, and Lucky Kid actually won, and perhaps almost as noteworthy as the match itself was David Starr's post-match promo.
And I think we should talk about the match first for just another minute or so, because Lucky Kid is the winner of the 2019 16-carat tournament. That is a big deal, one of the biggest tournaments in independent wrestling, and he defeated Walter in the final. That is something that David Starr never did. That is one of the reasons that this match was booked. So just like we talked about it with Gary J and Jake Parnell, there was a reason for this match to happen, and I think that intensity was very well represented in this match. And I really enjoyed it as well. I don't think it was one of the best matches of the weekend, but it was very good for what it was. And David Starr's promo was noteworthy because he pretty much threw WWE under the bus completely and talked about how the corporate wrestling is taking over the independent scene over WrestleMania weekend, because this was WXW and they were running alongside Evolve, which of course has a relationship with WWE. WXW has a relationship with WWE. So David Starr announced that because he was not probably going to get a chance to wrestle Walter again, that he was quitting the promotion. And there was a lot of static about this on Twitter, for whatever that's worth. And I'm not sure what to think about this promo, because I appreciated the passion and the delivery, but it's really hard for me to take something like this seriously when David Starr is then immediately selling merchandise after the show, and then he's apparently doing a work to shoot thing with Ring of Honor.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the promo is pretty harmless. I think I would need a good reason to view any promo as bigger than it actually presents itself to be. To me, it just felt like he saw something that he could kind of attack Walter for, right? And I guess it does make sense, because the next day, right, Walter wins the NXT UK title, and David Starr is a really good promo. Some of these issues, again, it's really hard, I think, to believe it on a realistic scale, right? Because like you said, he is selling merchandise and all this stuff. And I think you raise a good point about them taking a match seriously. And I think that's probably something a lot of people are going to have to face on these WrestleMania weekends, because, and I think we'll get to this, but to me, the WrestleMania weekend is almost now being defined in terms of independent wrestling by shows like Joey Janela's Spring Break, right? For better or worse, those are kind of the noteworthy shows that are happening on WrestleMania weekend from the independent side of things. And a lot of the emphasis and a lot of the excitement about those shows is it's just going to be full of silly and goofy matches and segments and concepts, right? And so when you have something like David Starr versus Lucky Kid or Jake Parnell against Gary J, I think one of the things I would like to try to evaluate is what is the audience for those matches on WrestleMania weekend. And I hope it's still there, because as much as Joey Janela's Spring Break maybe has a place on these weekends, I wouldn't like that kind of vibe to dominate the weekend. I think WrestleMania weekend is still a place to get new eyes on a promotion. It's still a place to present a serious match that has been well built up. So I think David Starr and Lucky Kid was that on this show.
And Ryan, you have just given me the perfect transition, as we can now talk about Josh Barnett's Bloodsport, a very unique event that took place for the first time last year, and this time no Matt Riddle, but it was Josh Barnett presenting the event. And this is an event that sold out as part of the collective with well over 1,000 fans in White Eagle Hall in New Jersey. And there was a lot of notable happenings. Not all of it was good, but it was certainly a very noteworthy show. And I kind of want to go over some of the highlights. I think the match that is going to stand out for everybody is Josh Barnett and Minoru Suzuki. Minoru Suzuki defeated Matt Riddle in the main event last year. This year, they did a 20-minute draw followed by a 5-minute overtime period, and they were not able to settle their differences. I gave this match 4.5 stars. This is one of the best of the weekend. This was, of course, the main event. And I think what you were talking about earlier, this was a match that was taken very seriously by both guys. There was no comedy in this one. It was just two guys exchanging holds and exchanging pretty hard strikes. And I think the crowd was very much into this throughout. And a lot of the same crowd that was at Bloodsport was also at Spring Break.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think, again, this is a concept show. And I think that it happening once a year really helps it when it does happen, right? And I think Suzuki and Barnett, and I think one of the telltale signs that Suzuki and Barnett was successful is that when they hit the 20-minute draw, I think maybe there was a feeling that the match would get 5 extra minutes, but no one was really upset. Like, I didn't hear a lot of boos. And then when they still couldn't get a winner in the 5-minute overtime, no one seemed to be really upset. I mean, I think everyone was just really thankful that they kind of witnessed this special match happen. And I mean, if you can, and we're just so used to when there are time limit draws, just the crowd just going completely dull. And I think probably part of that is whenever they see a draw, it's usually 60 minutes. A 20-minute draw, I think this is probably something that should be played around with more in other promotions of having non-title matches have a 20-minute time limit and actually seeing what you can do with draws. This is one of those shows where I think exactly what you're getting into when you buy it. They're going to be shorter matches. You know the style that you're going to get from these matches. And so I think if you're into this sort of thing, Josh Barnett's Bloodsport is a very, very safe purchase, right? In the same way that if you like what Joe Janela is doing on his shows, it probably is going to be a safe purchase. Now, there's a little asterisk to that, which we'll have to get to very later in the podcast. But these concept shows are at least, I think, useful in what they signal to the consumer before the consumer decides to buy it. I mean, you're not going to be surprised by what you get with these shows. And I think also I want to get your thoughts on this. I mean, I think the show started out kind of in a fun way. The second and third matches had, I think, two people that, if I were to look at the card on paper, I might not be so excited to see. But Simon Grimm and Davey Boy Smith Jr., I think they had impressive performances, and it felt like for both of those individuals, this style of match and this concept of a show was where they felt at home, and they just haven't been given this opportunity before to wrestle in this context.
And if you look at a lot of the people on this show, they were not on a lot of the other shows. If you run down the list, Josh Barnett, Frank Mir, Dan Severn, not on a lot of the other shows, and even J.R. Kratos and Simon Grimm. I don't know if they were on other shows throughout the weekend, but they definitely were not on any of the collective WWN or WrestleCon shows. So I think that's kind of speaks to what you were saying. But certainly these are guys that I would consider booking more and trying to incorporate at least some of this style into independent wrestling. It's definitely not for everyone, but I think part of the issue with a lot of indie wrestling shows is that they all kind of feel very samey with a lot of the same athletic type moves. I mean, you always hear the joke about how many Canadian destroyers you're going to see in a WrestleMania weekend. So I think that this show as a concept works for that reason, because you're not going to see that, but you're also going to see people that you would otherwise not see. And for me, I think there were a lot of just really good matches. Last year, as a concept, I liked it, but I don't think the show was as good, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't hate it. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't like, I have to go back and watch it right away. The Josh Barnett Minoru Suzuki match is a match that I could see myself going back and rewatching. The J.R. Kratos and Simon Grimm match is definitely something that I could see myself going back and watching. Even Chris Dickinson and Andy Williams, which is not a great match. They blew themselves up in the first 2 minutes, but I was like, I really want to see Andy Williams in other matches before, because he has a very unique look that makes him look like a real tough guy. And that's what I appreciated about this show. And of course, you also had Jonathan Gresham on the show wrestling Masashi Takeda. And Takeda's a deathmatch guy, and he was just in a completely different atmosphere. And I think it worked out for him really well. So I was just really impressed by Bloodsport as a whole, and I thought it really worked. And if this is not just a show that I would recommend for one match, I would definitely check everything out, even the opener, Dominic Garrini and Phil Baroni, because as bad as that match was, it's almost worth watching just to see Bryce Remsburg get out of the ring as quickly as possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's one of those things too where like rewatching these matches is not a big time commitment, because a lot of these matches are in like the 5 to 8 minute range. And yeah, I mean, to me, the only bad performance on the show was by Phil Baroni, and which presumably means that Ring of Honor is looking to sign him. But I don't know. To me, this was, up to this point in the weekend, this show was the show of the weekend for me. I mean, this was the best show that I'd seen so far, just because it knew what it wanted to be. It had identity, right? And I think that's what we wanted to see from a show like Family Reunion. We just wanted it to have some kind of identity, that this is what we're presenting. And I think that, like in the case of Masashi Takeda, where you have a deathmatch wrestler coming in and doing the style, I thought his match against Gresham, it was about 6.5 minutes. I thought it was very, very good. I mean, pretty much, I don't know if you could ask for anything more out of a 6-minute match than what you saw with them. And so, I think this show as a whole, when it was just over 2 hours, right? And I think that was almost a trend this weekend, as you pointed out on Twitter a lot, that I think these promotions at the very least understand that these shows cannot go ridiculously long, that this is a very, very long weekend for a lot of pro wrestling fans. And it just feels like Bloodsport as a concept, shorter matches, unique style, present a lot of different types of wrestlers. It just seems like that just fits perfectly into WrestleMania weekend as an independent wrestling show. So it's something that I hope they do again next year.
And I will point out that it seems like all of the collective events as part of it, they all went about 2 hours and 20 minutes with no intermission. And I think that's almost true for every one of those shows. And I think that's a really good thing. Even Spring Break 3 Part 2, which I think part of what hindered that show so much was that it started too late. But even that show, there were only 4 matches. And granted, the clusterfuck was like an hour and a half, but there were still really only 4 matches. And I think that show would have worked out so much better if it didn't start so late, especially on the East Coast. But we're going to get to that much later. Let's talk about CHIKARA. This was kind of a show that we really only picked because of the main event, which was a Grand Championship ladder match featuring Dasher Hatfield and Mark Angelicetti. And the reason that we picked this show really was because this was an actual rivalry. CHIKARA is more known for telling stories than a lot of the other companies. I think when people think about CHIKARA now, they think about the shutdown, they think of the ants, they think of some of the goofiness. But I have to say that in my view, top to bottom, I think this was one of the more fun shows to watch, and very similar to Bloodsport. I feel like you should just sit down, watch this show from beginning to end, because it was very well paced. There were different kinds of performers. There were different kinds of matches. And I really thought that this was a very pleasurable experience, especially to start on Friday.
I agree. I mean, with Bloodsport, I talked about a show having an identity. And it was very clear to me that this card itself was crafted very mindfully, right, as one might expect from Mike Quackenbush. I mean, you had title matches, you had the Hatfield Mr. Touchdown feud come to an end, and you also had acknowledgments of CHIKARA's past, right, which I really liked on this show, because you can imagine someone who watched CHIKARA 10 years ago, let's say, and just hasn't really paid attention lately. And so for a fan like that, you had that tag team match with all of the former Young Lions Cup winners, Jigsaw, Hallowicked, Chuck Taylor. These are people, obviously, that an old-time fan of CHIKARA would recognize and would get some nostalgia out of. The whole card to me was just very well crafted. Like I said, it had something for everyone. And I think CHIKARA put their best foot forward this weekend. I mean, even something like Fist against the Colony, right? I mean, that is the perfect blend of past and future, because an old-time CHIKARA fan would recognize, obviously, Fist in the Colony, and they might be surprised to come to find out that now Fist has Tony Deppen and Travis Huckabee, that Thief Ant is now an ant, whereas 10 years ago, Thief Ant was not a part of the colony. So I think everything, match quality aside for a second, just how they got to this card, I think was probably the best of the weekend for me, just in terms of trying to capture a consistent fan, maybe a new fan or an old fan, trying to bring them on board. I think this card was probably the best at that.
Right, and I think I want to talk about maybe some of the less consequential matches before we get into the big part of the card here. I really like the opener. Cornelius Crummels and Sonny Defarge defeated CCK of Chris Brooks and Kid Lycos. One of the things that I really respect about CHIKARA is when they bring in outsiders, it is not always a guarantee that the outsiders are going to beat their own talent. And I really like the fact that Crummels and Defarge, who are the CHIKARA regulars, got the win here. It was a very competitive match. I don't think CCK came off looking bad, but I think that the right team ultimately won in this situation. And if you look at the next match, Boomer Hatfield is generally regarded as one of the best rookies in wrestling. And even though it was a squash against Missile Assault Man, I think Boomer Hatfield still came across looking good. And I think that one of the things that I really liked about this match in particular is that it was a squash. You don't see enough squashes on independent wrestling and even WWE shows. And I do not think we should return to an era of WWF superstars in the 1990s when it is 45 minutes of squashes. That is not what I'm suggesting. But I think if on your biggest shows, if you can have one or two squash matches, that is a way that you can help get talent over. And they certainly did that with Missile Assault Man. I even think Ring of Honor, the one thing they did correctly was the way that they were able to get one of their talents over. And when we talk about it, I'll address it once again. But this is something that I really liked, and I want to see. This is also something that I think independent wrestling promoters should be looking at when they are preparing their cards is, who is somebody that we can showcase in a 2 to 3 minute squash and maybe get them over to our audience and to the new audience?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I generally agree. I think in order to have squash matches on a card, though, you have to be pretty confident that the rest of the card will deliver something worth watching, right? I mean, I think squash matches become a problem for me when the rest of the card just didn't have anything worth watching. Because I think it has to be a recognition that although Missile Assault Man and Boomer Hatfield could have maybe a 3-star match, we are going to forego that possibility for the sake of Missile Assault Man's character, which I think in a lot of contexts could be the right decision. It just has to be supported by the rest of the card. And I think here it was. So it was a smart decision to have that be a squash match. I think maybe one of the apprehensions that promoters might have towards having squash matches is, well, what does it do to Boomer Hatfield? I mean, we might be elevating one person at the expense of another. And I always think that those kind of complaints are a bit funny, just because it's not clear to me that promoters pay a lot of attention to any of their wrestlers' credibility on a long-term scale, right? And I think the most clear indication of this is with determining who gets title shots. No, I mean, Ring of Honor, it could be any of these promotions. And I think CHIKARA's the best at this in terms of how do we determine who gets to challenge for titles. At least CHIKARA has some kind of system, right? They have the point system where you have to earn 3 points and then you get a title shot by winning 3 matches in a row. Other promotions, they almost seemingly randomly assign title matches. And so I think CHIKARA is very mindful of how every show and every match is affecting the credibility of their wrestlers. And I think having that self-awareness allows for squash matches like this one. Truthfully, it's just a matter to me of CHIKARA just being very mindful of its booking. And certainly they fail, right? But they at least have, to me, the self-awareness to put some effort into telling stories and just determining how the promotion itself operates on a storyline level. That's not something I see really anymore. And I think CHIKARA showed that with this show.
Absolutely. And I think the one time that they did have a multi-person match with the 8-man tag, there was a clear purpose. There was a clear hook for it. All 8 of the men involved in that match were former Young Lions Cup holders. And I'm not saying that it's perfect, but I appreciated the fact that there was at least some effort to justify the reason that this Atomicos match took place. And CHIKARA, I also think they do Atomicos and six-man tags, trios matches so much better than almost any company. And I think in this case, what made it especially work is the fact that Razor Hawk, who is a current CHIKARA talent, is the one that got the pinfall victory. So even if that 8-man tag wasn't perfect, I appreciated the fact of what they did here. And the same thing for A-Kid versus Airwolf. I thought it was just a really spectacular, high-flying match. I think they almost got topped a little bit by the IWGP Junior title match, but as far as high-flying goes, I thought this was spectacular. This was a rematch of the Rey de Voladores tournament from King of Trios last year, where Airwolf got the win then, but A-Kid got the win this time. And I think that these two matches, even though you could easily write them off as showcase matches, I think there was at least a little bit of a reason for why they took place, while also maybe bringing in new fans or getting in more casual independent fans.
Yeah, and I think, and again, this is not, I mean, we could probably do a whole podcast on CHIKARA and kind of how they determine, basically the creative decisions behind CHIKARA, and I don't know if we're the most qualified people to have that podcast. I'm sure Kevin Ford has covered this much better than I will, but I just think the idea of the point system in determining title contenders pretty much gives every match a base reason for happening. I mean, it might not be it might not take the most effort, but like even something like the opener, right? I'm pretty sure in the opener, Cornelius Crumbles and Sonny DeForge, they earned their third point, right? So even though that was a showcase match, something came of it. And it just seems like such a no-brainer to have some system for determining contenders, because it does give meaning to matches that might otherwise lack it. And, so, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about, I think, how much I like the way CHIKARA operates in terms of a promotion. But, yeah, I mean, nothing here seemed frivolous in terms of why it was happening. And, something like Princess Kimberly against The Whisper was probably the worst match on the show, but this, they are the tag team champions of CHIKARA, and there was a story there, and it was kept short. It was about 3 minutes, so.
Right. Even the worst match on the show was relatively short, and it was just bad. Period. End of story. There really isn't a whole lot to say about it. All right, let's talk about the Young Lions Cup, as we had Still Life with Apricots and Pears. That is a real name of a wrestler. They defeated Carlos Romo. This is the first non-gender binary conforming champion in the history of pro wrestling. And this is something that wrestling is going to have to deal with in the next few years, as trans issues are something that are discussed in the real world and dealt with in the real world. And I am not sure if pro wrestling is ready at all to deal with this. But for a company like CHIKARA, they are probably the most capable of handling this situation. And I'm still not sure that they're doing it quite right, because they technically perform as a Rudo, and I think that's a bit of a problem.
It is an interesting situation. I don't. I mean, again, my only precedent for this in wrestling is in Dragon Gate. There is a wrestler whose name is Yosuke Santa Maria, and she is the first. I want to say trans. I mean, maybe probably not the first, because I truthfully don't know the history of it. But she is a transgender wrestler, and that ends up being handled very well from what I've seen of Dragon Gate. Still Life with Apricots and Pears is a gender non-binary wrestler, and I don't know. I mean, I cannot speak to this because I am not gender non-binary, but I wonder, because CHIKARA, the way they present this, they're not incredibly subtle with it, right? I mean, during Apricot's ring introduction, the ring announcer calls them they multiple times. Mike Quackenbush addresses it on commentary, and I don't know. I mean, it is, they are making it very obvious that this is what they are doing with the character, that this character is gender non-binary. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know what, if I was a non-binary person, I don't know what level of subtlety I would want out of this from CHIKARA's perspective. Would I want them to be kind of very much advertising it? Would I want them to be more subtle about it? I don't know. Those are questions I can't answer because I am not gender non-binary. But I would be curious to hear someone's take, on how Chikara's handling the character, because I honestly cannot speak to it. But
well, as far as their performance goes, I think Apricots and Pears did a really solid job, and I think from the potential, the in-ring potential, I think they can really get in the ring and do a good job. I think they were able to step up here and have a very different kind of match in that they were very focused on working a body part and getting a submission victory. So I thought as far as showcasing this person's talent, I think Chikara did a good job in that way. I'm just not sure what the long-term prospects of this character are, because my concern is that they're going to try to have their cake and eat it too by saying that they are this very progressive company by having this person as their champion, but then they're going to continue to book them in maybe a more tame Goldust way, I guess is kind of what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and I think part of it might just be I don't know if Still Life with Apricots and Pears is a character. I don't know if they can talk. Can they talk? I'm not sure.
This is not something that I'm aware of either way.
Because, again, it's one of those things where I guess if we're going to do this character, I wouldn't mind some kind of educational aspect to it, just in terms. So I don't know. I mean, it seems like if Apricots and Pears can't talk, I don't know if that's ideal. I mean, I don't know. There's a ton of ways that you can go about doing something like this in terms of introducing it to an audience that might not be familiar with the concept of gender non-binary people. So I don't know. I mean, it's very hard to determine based on one match where this is going or what has happened previously. So, it's something to follow, I think, for sure.
All right, and of course, let's talk about the main event. This is a main event that I think is well worth discussing, especially because this was the best ladder match of the weekend. Dasher Hatfield defeating Mark Angelo Setti. I really hate to do this, but I do want to compare it to the Ring of Honor ladder match. Because the fact of the matter is that you had two guys who had been a tag team. They have been in a rivalry. This had so much meaning. There is so much history. They aired a brief 2-minute video package before this to kind of illustrate what's been going on recently, but I don't think that video package came anywhere close to illustrating the history that these two have. So this match was a big deal. And even though this was a little bit tamer than I think the Ring of Honor ladder match, this still felt more violent. It felt like it had more impact, pun not intended. And there was just something about the ending. It just felt very dark. The fact that Hatfield literally powerbombed Angelo Setti through the ladder, climbed up and grabbed the title. That was as definitive as it got. And Hatfield came off like a complete Rudo/heel, even though there was a little bit of interaction with Boomer Hatfield, but there was not any interference. Dasher Hatfield won the match fair and square, but he just came off like a complete Rudo, and I think it's really ballsy to have an ending like this where you have the Rudo just completely dominate and win in a clean fashion. And I almost admire Chikara for going with this ending and trying to build some intrigue about what is going to happen next.
I think you have to look at ladder matches in context in a lot of ways, and because for me, if I was reviewing this, if I was typing something up and reviewing this, I would definitely point out that, look, this is the third ladder match in Chikara's history. And their history is, I believe, 17, 18 years. So I think the point remains that ladder matches are a rarity for Chikara. And I think if you're comparing it to Ring of Honor, I mean, Ring of Honor is a promotion that started having ladder wars just for the sake of having ladder wars. So I think given the context of Chikara's history, this was appropriately violent. And part of me thought it was almost charming that at a few points, Hatfield and Mr. Touchdown, they didn't quite know how to operate all of the weapons. It felt a little awkward at times, but actually, to me, that might be charming in some moods because these, again, are wrestlers not accustomed to having ladder matches, right? So I think the tone here was definitely correct. Everything. I mean, I'm not, again, overly familiar with the storyline, but it almost seemed like there was a familial aspect to the Hatfields where I believe they panned to the crowd and Boomer and someone else was in the crowd kind of almost looking on in horror when he won. So, I mean, there's a lot here, right? But I do think that it was accessible enough to a new viewer to create some intrigue. So I think CHIKARA hit all the right notes here. I think this was infinitely more enjoyable than the Ring of Honor ladder match. Again, as you said, Jerome, even if it wasn't as showy in terms of the big spots, I think that this match was more in line with the spirit of ladder matches, where there's a feud, there's implications, and everything is just has some kind of meaning. And I think this was a good way to end the show. And I was on the whole very happy with CHIKARA's effort this weekend.
I was as well, and I think the principle behind having a ladder match, when you think about the Razor Ramon Shawn Michaels ladder match that took place all the way back at WrestleMania 10, the reason that match happened was because there was a dispute over whom the real Intercontinental Champion was, and in this specific case, there was a dispute over who the real CHIKARA Grand Champion was, and I think it is logical to have a ladder match where the person literally has to grab the title belt, and in this case, they did a really good job of building it up and then paying it off. So I think CHIKARA hit a home run, and I think independent promoters should use this card. Again, you're not going to be CHIKARA, but I think there is a model here that other promotions can follow that will lead you to having a much more satisfying WrestleMania weekend, so that you don't end up putting the kind of show like WWN did with their Mercury Rising 2019 Super Show, where you just had a lot of random matches, some of which were good, some of which were bad. But Ryan, you and I are contractually obligated to talk about at least one WWN show, and since Evolved 125 was not a part of the Fight TV package, here we are talking about Mercury Rising, talking about WWN, talking about the same things over and over again. It's almost like I almost don't know what to say when it comes to Mercury Rising. I mean, I'm just scanning my notes here. I mean, this is something where I think the amount of dread coming out of the Ring of Honor show is very obvious. It's obvious to people. I think it's obvious to a lot of people why the Ring of Honor show does not spell good things for that promotion. But I think it's almost to an equal degree, yet not as obvious, that coming out of Mercury Rising, I don't know the incentive I have to keep up with Evolve or FIP or any of these WWN companies based on this show. I mean, I really don't. It seems to me, coming out of this show, that Evolve is the place to see JD Drake singles matches. And that might be the only reason to keep up with that company coming out of this show. Which, let's face it, that match was really good. JD Drake and Kasusada Higuchi. What a tremendous match. There's something about JD Drake where there's always a sense of danger in everything that he does, because he is a bigger guy. He's about 300 pounds. He's got great facial expressions, but he moves around the ring like he's a cruiserweight at times, and I think that's really effective. Not only does he move like a cruiserweight, but he also hits really hard, and he does a tremendous variety of strikes. So he's really got a complete game, and what a title defense this was. I really, really like this match. I kind of have an almost ambivalent feeling towards every other match on this card. We can get into some of the booking issues, but man, the WWN title match was legitimately great. And again, if you got the Fight TV package and you have not watched this show, you should definitely go back and watch this.
I agree. I mean, I think it was by far the best thing on the show, and it's almost, I don't follow Evolve that well, but I think what ended up happening, if I can remember correctly, is that JD Drake and Anthony Henry had kind of a random we talk about CHIKARA building up contenders. JD Drake and Anthony Henry kind of had a random Evolve tag team title shot, and they won on their first attempt, and it was kind of surprising. And I imagine JD Drake and Anthony Henry's ascension through Evolve and WWN is somewhat interesting and probably a bright spot of the WWN family over the past year. So I think it's not surprising that JD Drake would have the best match of the show. I think he's definitely being put in a position to succeed, but he's also working really hard, and I think that's just very obvious from watching these matches. But I mean, there's a lot we could talk about in terms of negativity on the show. I think the one aspect of it that stood out for me was in the Austin Theory match. It was Austin Theory and Brandy Lauren against Darby Allin and Priscilla Kelly. Now, presumably Darby Allin, I understand, is on his way out of the WWN family, but at one point in that match, I believe it was Lenny Leonard on commentary, said he noted that he said some variant of the following. Theory is much more concerned about the next Evolve show on, in April, whatever, where he's defending the Evolve title against, and he named some NXT wrestler that I had no idea who he was. And I think that is the core problem of this, right? That really Evolve moving forward is just, the cards are just a function of who NXT is going to give them on any given weekend to come perform. And it's very hard for someone to start following a company where there doesn't seem to be any sense that any of the talent is going to be there consistently. And if someone does get really hot, they might just get scooped up by NXT. So I don't know what the incentive is to keep up with Evolve. I really don't know.
Well, and I think that speaks to also the elimination match that took place, where it was Anthony Green, Barrett Brown, Colby Corino, Cyrus Satin, Harlem Bravado, John Silver, and Shotzi Blackheart. Shotzi Blackheart was originally not going to be in the match, but then they make this big deal out of that this is for girls too, and Shotzi Blackheart becomes involved, and then she just gets eliminated about halfway through, and it's like, so why do we put Shotzi Blackheart in this match if we're just going to do this? And Harlem Bravado is a former tag team champion in this company. He's been on a lot of shows, and he's fighting for a contract. Colby Corino, who did not win in this match, was just out with the other members of the Unwanted later. What was the purpose of this match, Ryan?
This seems like a match to me where I think Gabe was probably backstage looking through the curtain and saying, you know what, everyone really stood out here. This was great. And to me, no one really stood out. I mean, Anthony Green stood out insofar as he won, but again, I think when we talk about a promotion like CHIKARA, who, for all intents and purposes, is very, very particular about the stories they present and the specific details of those stories, I mean, the booking here just seems to have gone off the rails a little bit. There's just so much here. I don't know. I mean, like, in the third match, Miyu Yamashita, she won the Shine title, and I forgot about that until I just looked at my notes just now. I mean, nothing on this show really, to me, had any kind of impact moving forward. And I mean, I'm curious about your thoughts on the main event, just because it is almost a tradition at this point to have a six-man tag team match, although I feel like the tradition, I mean, I don't know if this match was kind of within the spirit of where the tradition started, which was with Dragon Gate six-man tag team matches on Ring of Honor shows. This main event, to me, felt like a chance to have Leon Ruff and Adrian Alanis in a high-profile situation. This six-man tag main event, to me, was not almost a celebration of some of the best talent in independent wrestling, which is what I had presumed the six-man tradition was. This, to me, just felt like an Evolve showcase match with DDT talent.
I very much agree with you. I felt that way about the other six-man tag as well. I think that one was a little bit more story-orientated because it was about the Unwanted with Kingston, Gacy, and Strickland getting a victory, and Strickland will presumably be challenging for the WWN or Evolve Championship at some point. And I think that that's kind of why they did what they did. But I don't think either one of these six-man tags really stood out. And I was trying to think back on the last few years, because this is something that they've done pretty consistently in different forms. I know that, Kota Ibushi and Will Ospreay have been involved in some of these matches, but I think the six-man tag that everybody fondly remembers is the one from 2006 with the Dragon Gate Wrestlers. That was the match of the year for that year. It's the infamous one where the fans were chanting, "Please don't stop." And people just will remember that match for as long as they live. These six-man tags have very little relevancy to what is going on in the rest of WWN. And while I appreciate the fact that they are trying to keep up this tradition, if you look on every single card on this event, there were six-man tags. So it's very hard to have that level of relevancy when every other show is having so many multiple man matches. And I just, for me, the WWN show was just very frustrating for that reason. It just felt very lifeless. And to me, I think that this has been a problem that WWN has always had. The WWN shows have always felt lifeless. I think some of that has to do with the atmosphere. Some of it has to do with the crowds not being enthusiastic all the time. I think the lighting for these shows has just been consistently terrible for the last 10 years. I know that Larry Csonka, poor Larry Csonka, was having trouble with the stream on the show on the WWN Club. So they just have a lot of negativity surrounding them. And I think Gabe himself is a very polarizing force. And I think there are a lot of people who do not like the idea of supporting WWN for that reason too. Can't say I blame them, but I think what you end up with is you end up with a lot of very forgettable matches, and especially over WrestleMania weekend, WWN Live has a real tendency to do this, where they have a mixture of some questionable booking decisions, along with some matches that on paper look like they're going to be really good, but then there's something about them that just doesn't click, because there really is not a story involved in them.
If you take the Dragon Gate 6-man, if you take the uniqueness, the quality of that match, and you put it on this Mercury Rising show, I don't know if it would have the same impact because of the things you said. Supercard of Honor, with that crowd, with those commentators, with that venue, I mean, there are these intangibles that go into matches like that. And I don't know if Mercury Rising in La Boom is even the venue or even has the atmosphere to have a match that is going to be talked about 10 years later, right? And that's a shame, because I think they are capable of presenting that, but this isn't it. And I think there is this kind of cloud that hangs over these WWN matches where it's something's just not coming together. And also, I mean, that cloud would still be there, assuming that there are wrestlers on these cards that I really, really want to see. Another hurdle here is that I'm just not that interested in Austin Theory and Joe Gacy right now. And Austin Theory, I mean, a lot of work has gone into making Austin Theory someone who is supposed to be interesting to people. He's very young, obviously has a lot of talent at his age, but I'm just not finding Austin Theory to be that intriguing. I mean, he's not someone who I want to watch on a monthly basis, where someone like JD Drake is. But it's supremely clear that Austin Theory kind of is the chosen one on these shows, and it's really up to the fans to either be interested or not interested in that. Again, I always say the burden is not on the fans to be interested in someone like Austin Theory. Gabe has to make us interested, and I don't think he's done that.
It's my view that if you're going to have someone like Austin Theory on these shows, then to me what you need to do is you need to put him in the ring with Eddie Kingston and have him feud with Eddie Kingston for a year. I don't give a shit what's going on with the Unwanted. I don't care about that. If you have Eddie Kingston, this is a guy who makes matches more engaging. This is a guy who has a character. He is a wrestler that people remember. He might not be the greatest worker of all time, but I guarantee you that Eddie Kingston, the promo that he cut before High Noon, is something that people do remember 10 years later, even though it's an independent wrestling event. But I think that High Noon promo is something that really stands out. That is the type of guy that Austin Theory should be working with for the next year. Because I guarantee you, if Eddie Kingston cannot bring that out of him, then nobody else is going to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is true. I remember in PWG 10 years ago, Chris Hero and Akira Tozawa's matches, because it was someone, Akira Tozawa back then was just a really spunky young worker, and Chris Hero, beat the shit out of him, and it worked, right? And I think Eddie Kingston and Austin Theory could have a similar dynamic. I don't know what the answer here is, I think, for Evolve and WWN. They're so far down this road, and especially in terms of the relationship to NXT, that I don't think that anything is going to be done, right? I think Gabe will continue to bring in talent, some of which is kind of interesting, some of which is not. They will kind of go through the promotion pretty swiftly, and it just seems like a revolving door at this point of talent, and I don't know. I mean, Joe Gacy is here, right? I mean, for every Eddie Kingston that Gabe brings on, there's going to be a Joe Gacy that just kind of just cancels out my interest. I don't know. I mean, we're reaching a territory where I'm finding very little reason to follow Ring of Honor or WWN, and I didn't necessarily think that we would come to that point, and it's not clear to me which promotions are going to start filling in that void. So I mean, this show, looking at the card, I thought there might be some potential here, but this did not deliver in the way that I wanted it to.
Speaking of another company that I don't believe delivered, we were originally going to talk about Absolute Intense Wrestling and their show, but I decided, this is my bad.
Yes, Jerome. I blame you for this one. I'm sorry.
So we're gonna do an apology to AIW at some point. We'll make that more clear when we get to the end of this podcast, but I wanted to review Black Label Pro's Adventures in Wrestling. Now, Ryan, you look at this card. There are some intriguing things on this card, right?
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Right. I presumably.
You are not feeling that. You were not feeling this from the beginning. So you're just this. It's time to bury Jerome. This is your opportunity, Ryan.
Well, no. I mean, no. Look, in all fairness to you, I understand why you were intrigued by Nick Gage against Swoggle. I understand that, but I guess I don't necessarily agree. But fair. It's fair.
It's rare when Ryan gets one up on me, but this is definitely an occasion where I have to take my punishment. I really do, because this was an aggressively mediocre show at times, and at other times it was just bad. And I think we look at the Black Label Pro Championship match, which started this. It was meant to be a street fight. Kobe Durst defeated Ethan Page, who was the champion, to win the title. You knew that this was a street fight because they were wearing jeans with knee pads. This match was marred by interference multiple occasions as Kobe Durst, his boys, came out and interfered on his behalf. Ryan, when you're doing a street fight and you're doing interference, why don't they just interfere from the very beginning?
Oh, you're preaching to the choir there. I mean, that is definitely something that I cannot explain at all. I also cannot explain in this opener why when Durst wins, the commentary immediately goes, Durst retains, which is not in fact what happened. He won the title off Ethan Page. But I think the greater problem here is you talked earlier about promotions opening the show with their title matches. And this not only was a title match, but it was a street fight. And I got the sense from watching this opener that this was just way too much for an opener on a big show. I just think that this was just too much, and it was going to hamper a lot of the stuff that came after it.
I agree with you. I think Black Label Pro, just in general, had a ton of problems pacing this show, and we're going to get to that as we go through each match, because I actually, in this case, do want to do that. As Kobe Durst defeats Ethan Page, then we go right into another championship match as Orange Cassidy defeated Bryan Alvarez. This was bad. This was kind of a carbon copy of the previous night. Bryan Alvarez is not as good of a wrestler as Jonathan Gresham is. And Bryan Alvarez lost because Marco Stunt's music played. And the funny thing is, Bryan Alvarez, on his show, bitches and moans about distraction finishes on Raw. And what happens here, Ryan? Bryan Alvarez loses because of a distraction.
Well, that's if true, that is a bit wild. I don't necessarily listen to Bryan Alvarez's show, but I think, well, for all I said about Orange Cassidy and the Jonathan Gresham match, I do think that when Orange Cassidy is in the ring with someone like Bryan Alvarez, it's probably smarter to rely on Orange Cassidy's antics, because they're going to work with the crowd regardless of who his opponent is. You can be Bryan Alvarez or you can be Jonathan Gresham. If you step on Orange Cassidy's sunglasses, the crowd's going to react. I'd rather him stick to his guns here against someone like Bryan Alvarez than against Jonathan Gresham. So although this match was not good, I don't fault it as much for just being the typical Orange Cassidy match, because there's only so much he's going to do with someone like Bryan Alvarez.
Up next, so I want to talk about the Rock and Roll Express, because they somehow had a really good match against LAX. And after thinking about it, I really wish that they were in this tag team match as well, because Manny Fernandez and Tank were not good. They lost to Sadconf. Sadconf actually won this match. You wouldn't know it if you watched it and if you watched the post-match, because Manny Fernandez and Tank pretty much dominated. This was never a tag team match. Sadconf got a fluke victory, and then Fernandez and Tank just kept kicking their asses. I hate when companies do this.
Yeah, in my notes here, I just have why is Tank using a fork? Presumably there just weren't any rules in this match. I just have Tank used a fork, Greenies bleeding, half a star. Those are my notes. No, and also it was the second roll finish in a row, and which again is not specific to Black Label, but I don't know. Yeah, it wasn't good, and again, it just seems like we hit a string of matches because we had the Orange Cassidy Bryan Alvarez match, we had Tank using a fork, and then we transitioned into Nick Gage against Swoggle.
Nick Gage and Swoggle, which I guess was an improvement over the previous match, I guess. But this was nothing to write home about either. I am just perplexed as to why Swoggle wrestled multiple times across the collective. And the thing that kind of bothers me is that Swoggle was trying, I guess because he doesn't live in a bubble. He has to understand that there is criticism being levied against him, and he was trying, and I was just so concerned that he was going to hurt himself because he was not good, and he was trying, and I was legitimately concerned that he was going to seriously injure himself at some point this weekend.
No, I mean I think that's fair, and I'm not going to fault him for trying really hard. I mean I think he is someone who cares about his work, and I think it just is one of those things where he gets booked continually in these scenarios where I think just based on the pairing, the crowd is preconditioned to think that the match is going to be insane, right? Nick Gage against Swoggle, Scott Steiner against Swoggle. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on Swoggle in these matches to deliver something unique and special, and yeah, it's almost a little unfair to the guy. But to me, it's hard for me to imagine the booking meeting for this show where they go, okay, we'll do Manny Fernandez and Tank, and then we'll follow it up with Nick Gage and Swoggle. Oh, by the way, we'll have PB Smooth interfere in that match, and then Marcus Crane can come out and throw a fireball at PB Smooth, and then we'll just follow that up with a Battle Royal. Seems like we're presenting a good show that will get a lot of new viewers on our product. I don't see it.
All right, let's get to the rest of the card. So we had 3 singles matches and a tag match. Then we go into a battle royal with at least 20 people. There's an 8-man tag that was originally a 6-man tag. And then there was a 10-woman tag. Ryan, did anything about any of these 3 matches stand out to you?
No, I don't think. I mean, the battle royal was 11 minutes. The 6, is it 8 or 6? I honestly don't know. The 8-person tag was 6 minutes, and then the 10-woman tag was 11 minutes. I mean, so you're seeing, I don't know, 30 wrestlers in under 30 minutes at this point in 3 different matches. Nothing's ever going to stand out in that context.
I think if Black Label Pro is ever going to run a show again, they can never have this kind of organization because they really did their wrestlers a disservice by doing it this way. And I guess I can understand a Battle Royal, but the Battle Royal was really bad. Battle Royals are really hard to do on the independent scene because you're trying to frame things in a different way and some of the technical aspects don't work. Stay away from doing them. I don't understand the value of having a Battle Royal on any show at this point. I think the 8-man tag, it's funny because Gary J and Jake Parnell were across from each other and they had about 60 seconds of interaction, and this was again a match that meant almost nothing, even though C.W. Anderson was involved in it. I think the 10-woman tag at least had a little bit more of a hook to it because I think they got a little bit more time, and Jordan Grace, again, is really good. She got the pinfall. Given she is a Black Label Pro regular, this makes sense. But it's like you had Kylie Ray, who is the freelance champion. You had Nicole Savoy, who is the Shimmer champion. You had Shazza McKenzie, who is probably well regarded as one of the best international wrestlers in the world. Samantha Heights is the Heart of Shimmer champion. And they're almost secondary to everything else that's going on. So you cannot do these multi-woman, multi-man matches.
At least this many in a row. Yeah. I mean, I think that we talk about the CHIKARA one where it was an 8-man tag team match with, former Young Lions Cup winners. Again, I think that is perfectly fine as long as there is a hook. And obviously, and I think, we talked about this, off air, the match that I think really suffered from this was the Black Label Pro Tag Team title match between Shane Saber and Space Monkey defending against Davey Vega and Matt Fitchett, as well as Robbie Eagles and Sammy Guevara. A lot of talent in that ring for a 3-way tag team match that ended up being under 6 minutes.
Right, and maybe part of this was because they were rushing to fit into their 2.5 hour time frame. But if you delete one or two of these matches, then you can give this 3-way title match a little bit more time, or even better, take one of the teams out, have them wrestle two other people, and either get Space Pirates versus Besties in the World or Robbie Eagles and Sammy Guevara, because I guarantee you that those matches are probably going to be much, much better. I think this was enjoyable for the 6 minutes that it went, but again, you really did not get a sense of standing out. And the thing that really bothers me is the Space Pirates have tag titles not just in this company, but they also have tag titles for Alpha One, and you would not really know that after this weekend. Is there anything memorable about the Space Pirates from this weekend?
No, not for me. No, I mean, I've seen Space Monkey quite a bit in AIW. Part of me, I wasn't aware that he had these tag titles on him, so I was wondering if he had gotten much better, because I think AIW would use him a lot in just comedy context, and I had no idea what he could do in a more serious role. I think that one of the problems with the way Black Label Pro did this card is that if let's say, for whatever reason, let's say I wanted to, after watching this, follow Black Label Pro, I actually have no idea how many of the people on this show are going to be in the promotion on a monthly basis, right? I mean, aside from Ethan Page and Kobe Durst, how many of these people actually wrestle for Black Label Pro regularly? I actually have no idea. It seemed this card almost to me, like you could have told me that this card was the family reunion show, and I would have believed you.
Yes, I can certainly understand that. And then Jonathan Gresham, 3 minutes before this main event shows up, and he defeats Shigehiro Iri. I really like this. This was 10 minutes, and I feel like I got more out of these 10 minutes than anything else on the card. Again, I don't think this is a match of the year contender, but if you're going to watch a match from this show, make it this one, because Iri is really good, and give Jonathan Gresham some love, because he was in the Ring of Honor Battle Royal, and you could have really missed him. Give Gresham some love and watch this if you can.
Yeah, I mean, again, I agree. This is just a 10-minute match between two very good wrestlers, and maybe I can talk about it when we get to Ring of Honor. I'm pretty convinced the Ring of Honor match on that show should have been Jay Lethal defending against Jonathan Gresham. Obviously, that's not the direction Ring of Honor wanted to go, but I do think it's a shame that Gresham was simply in that Battle Royal.
All right, so we are done talking about Black Label Pro. Maybe we never speak of it again. I think, I'll be honest, I think that was the worst show I saw this weekend.
I would agree. I mean, it was just the show where the card was structured in such a way. I mean, yeah, the worst card structure of the weekend. And again, that 3-match series where you had about 30 wrestlers, it's almost beyond words how you can sit down in a booking meeting and put that together. I have no idea.
So you can blame me for that one. That was my bad. Let's talk about Spring Break 3, Part 1. We started off with Marco Stunt defeating Joey Janela. Both of these men returning to the ring for the first time, and I have some good things. I have some bad things. On the good side, I'm really glad that Joey Janela put both Stunt and Jungle Boy the next night over. I think that's a really good thing. He's booking these shows. There is no reason that he has to win. I think he is going to get respect from the crowd. He's going to be over no matter what. I think other companies can put him over. There's no reason that Janela had to win, so that was a good thing. The bad side, I didn't like the kiss spot with Marco Stunt and Penelope Ford. It's 2019. I do not like sexual harassment spots, especially when they're being done by babyfaces. This is something that Ring of Honor got heavily criticized for when Mike Bennett and I believe it was Mike Mondo were feuding. And if you're going to hold Ring of Honor to that standard, I think you have to hold Spring Break to this standard too. I don't think it's kosher. I don't think it's okay. I don't think it's something that should be done on a consistent basis. And one of the things that we're going to talk about with Game Changer Wrestling, in a lot of ways, they are the torch holders for independent wrestling right now. Because Ring of Honor, they are not an independent company. WWN, they are not an independent company. You look at the company that drew the most consistently. Joey Janela is the one that picked this venue. They're the one that had a streaming throughout the weekend, record numbers of people. They have to take more responsibility, and this is the first example of that. Plus, the match itself, I thought, went way too long. I think Joey Janela's matches tend to do this. They tend to go way too long. The same thing happened with Sasuke last year. If this was 8 minutes instead of 16 minutes, this would have been much better. I said a lot about this opening match, Ryan, so I'm going to let you speak on it now.
I think it did go too long, but I think part of that was trying to establish that Joey Janela and Marco Stunt are back and can have a good match. And I mean, even if you and I don't view this match as good, I think the idea was, let's go out there and have a longer match and show that we are healthy and can go at our absolute best again, which in theory is fine. There was one spot in this match in particular where Joey Janela is on the apron, Marco Stunt jumps off the top rope and tries to Hurricane Rana Janela onto the apron, and the whole thing just did not go well. They both landed very awkwardly. I think from that, Marco Stunt got busted open, and then from that point on, the match just kind of fell off the rails a bit, and so there was that moment in the match. I think probably save a lot of this discussion for Spring Break Part 2, but there are situations this weekend where I think the booking of these spring breaks missed the mark in terms of the moral conscience of everything. So, I mean, I guess we can just reserve that discussion for part 2 when we kind of wrap up these spring break shows. But again, I like the idea of this as the opener, and it's something that Joey Janela did on part 2. He opened the show with Jungle Boy. I think that one worked out much better. This had that spot that went awry, and 16 minutes is a lot.
Up next, we had Tony Deppen come out, and he was complaining about not being on the show. And then he goes into the audience, and he literally goes after somebody who has no legs. I am not going to refer to him as No Legs because I just think that's disrespectful. His real first name is apparently Dustin, so I'm going to go with Dustin for the duration of this podcast. Ryan, I'm not going to lie, I almost shut the show off at this point. But Dustin is a wrestler, and Dustin has better body control than Kelly Klein, at least, and probably a lot of the other wrestlers on the show. I don't know what to make of this because, on the one hand, I don't necessarily like the setup with Tony Deppen hearing chants of "You suck dick," which I think, again, it's 2019. We can do better. Just because somebody sucks dick, that does not make them a heel. Just because you call somebody a fucking pussy, that does not make them a heel. I think we kind of have to get over this, and I know the GCW crowd has a reputation because they also chanted "kill the F word" in Los Angeles, which I don't think is kosher either. So I'm really very trepidatious about really even talking about GCW at times, but I think this worked all the way around, and it kind of worked. And I guess in a way, GCW is being inclusive by having somebody who is, I guess for lack of a better term, disabled, and who is very capable. Even though he lost the match, he is somebody that really stood out.
GCW appears to be where they are in the landscape of independent wrestling because they are creating moments, right? And a lot of those moments feel organic. And this, to me, was an attempt to do that, picking out someone random from the crowd. This idea that you were about to turn the show off, and that just from watching the show, the crowd didn't know what to make of Dustin at first. And then, of course, he comes into the ring and is actually very capable of pro wrestling and can do these incredible things. It's interesting. I don't know how to feel about it. I think the end result is a good one, that Dustin Thomas got to show that, look, you can have these hardships and you can overcome them and you can do what you love. That obviously is all good. It's, I think, the setup that is done purposefully to make this seem very natural and organic. And I think we could have some problems with the setup, but still like the end result, and agree that we could probably improve upon the setup. Because if the setup is that Tony Deppen is a jerk and he just wanted to pick on someone, and, I think there are, like you said, the chance and everything. I think this whole thing really was a tale of two stories. I don't know. I mean, I part of me wonders if you had advertised this as, look, here's Dustin Thomas. He does not have legs. he wants to just try his luck, and he's gonna issue an open challenge, right? And then Tony Deppen comes out and kind of writes off Dustin Thomas, right? Why not do that? Well, I think the reason why you don't do that is because if you present Dustin Thomas as a wrestler up front, everyone will be less impressed when he can do tiger feint kicks and springboard sentons. But my thing is that really worth it? I mean, is the surprise factor worth it to have this set up where, again, we're chanting "You suck dick" at Tony Deppen, and I honestly don't think. So I think there are better ways to present this, and I think if you want to do something unorthodox and present it in a way that is just fun for everyone, I think we probably saw that later in the show with the Invisible Man stuff. This to me was a mixed bag.
I agree. We had a scramble match where Jungle Boy defeated A-Kid, Australian Suicide, Jake Atlas, Shane Mercer, and Slim J. I think a lot of these multi-man matches tend to run together. I think the big difference here is that Shane Mercer made himself a lot of money, earned himself a lot of bookings. He looked tremendously impressive, arguably more impressive than the person who won this match. But I think Jungle Boy is very, very good, and I think he would have a much better match with Joey Janela the next night. I just thought this was a really fun scramble, and that's really all I have to say about it. There really isn't a lot else that I can comment on, because it was just really fun and really crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I can be concise too, just in that this was a showcase match that actually showcased people, and for whatever reason, that appears to be a lost art this weekend. And look, I mean, Shane Mercer, again, yeah, he should be in a lot of places coming out of this. I mean, some of the stuff he did was just insane. So, and honestly, Shane Mercer is the type of wrestler, I mean, he seems to be very power-based and things like that, and you wouldn't necessarily know all that he's capable of just by looking at him. And so typically when people break out, you expect like someone like Jungle Boy who's going to do a lot of the high-flying stuff. I mean, Shane Mercer was just doing these feats of strength that he just stood out in ways that I don't typically see independent wrestlers stand out anymore. He seems like a very, very unique wrestler, and I'd be shocked if something doesn't come out of this for him.
All right, so we had Nick Gage. Nick Gage, his favorite wrestler when he was growing up was Shinjiro Otani. This is true for a lot of the people that he wrestled this weekend. This is also true for Eddie Kingston, whom he wrestled on the AIW show. This is for the GCW title. Nick Gage won via a roll-up, and I thought this was short. It was fine. I don't think anybody wants to watch Nick Gage in an extensive battle, but I think this was fine for what it was, and I think it was really cool to see something that was pretty unique, because Nick Gage is not someone that you would typically think of as wrestling this style, but he seemed to be relatively comfortable in the time given. And it was also interesting to see Nick Gage's promo afterwards, because typically he's very fiery, he's very angry, but in this case he paid a lot of respect to Otani, and I thought it was just it was a very unique atmosphere, and I appreciated that.
I think if you watch Nick Gage's AIW stuff, especially when he's challenging for the Absolute title, you can see him in there against people like Tracy Williams, against Tim Donst, and you realize how versatile Nick Gage is in terms of the styles that he can wrestle. And I don't think this was amazing by any means, but it obviously meant something to Nick Gage. Much like the LAX Rock and Roll Express match meant something to LAX on part 2. So These kinds of matches, again, it was 10 minutes. It was relatively harmless. I think Nick Gage got a lot out of it, and it was a cool moment. So, yeah.
All right, the rest of this card, there really isn't a lot to say in my view. There are 4 other matches to discuss. Taka Michinoku defeating Orange Cassidy. Orange Cassidy, Michinoku, they didn't really take a lot of bumps. This was kind of a carbon copy of Cassidy's other matches. I thought it was fun. Michinoku won with, of course, the Michinoku driver, which makes sense. I don't think he took a bump, so it was an easy payday for him. I'm kind of surprised that Taka Michinoku has not taken more bookings in the United States, but based on this performance, maybe this is why, because he really doesn't want to take bumps. We had Invisible Man defeating Invisible Stan. This is something that has been built up. Here's the thing. This is not necessarily my jam. But if you want to see Bryce Remsburg at his best, you need to watch this match, because Bryce Remsburg sells this better than I have seen anyone sell anything this entire weekend. And I know that there has been talk about starting an Independent Wrestling Hall of Fame. If Bryce Remsburg does not go in the first class, then your Hall of Fame has no credibility, because Bryce Remsburg was spectacular. I really don't have any other words. It's honestly worth it to watch this quote-unquote match just for what Bryce Remsburg does in making you believe that there are two actual people wrestling. Starman defeated Ethan Page. Starman was revealed to be Virgil, and Ethan Page this was apparently a battle for his soul. This went like 3 seconds, and Ethan Page said that the clusterfuck would be the greatest. It certainly was the longest. And then there was a death match. Masashi Takeda defeating Jimmy Lloyd. Death matches are not necessarily my thing. I think this was fine for what it was, and the crowd seemed to like it, so I can't totally knock it.
I don't know if I have really anything to add. I mean, I like the Invisible Man stuff, and I think the main events between Jimmy Lloyd and Masashi Takeda, that was a fun reminder of old CCW shows where the death match has to go on last. So one, people can leave if they don't want to watch it, and two, because of the cleanup. So probably not a match that, absent those two factors, I'd put in the main event, but it kind of has to be. And they started the match by hitting themselves with light tubes to get fired up, and that kind of draws the line in the sand for a lot of people. If you're into that kind of stuff, you watch it. If you're not, you don't. And I think the show as a whole, it almost, kind of what we drew out here and just discussing it, it felt like the first three matches were really where a lot of the action and notable happenings were. And then the rest of the card was almost like a bunch of matches that would be an acquired taste. So, I think if you're thinking about going back and watching this or going back and buying this, you could probably just look at the card and things probably played out how you would expect them to. So if this stuff is your thing, I would watch it. If not, I wouldn't. I thought the show as a whole was okay.
I thought it was okay to fine. I'd say thumbs maybe slightly up for this show, because I think when you get a Joey Janela Spring Break, you're always going to have a crowd that's into it. You're always going to have a great atmosphere. And I think that's what people are very much into. I think what made Spring Break 2 so special was the fact that you actually had two really good matches on that show, with Mike Quackenbush versus David Starr and Walter versus PCO. You did not necessarily get that this year. I think that's the big difference, is that you didn't have matches nearly as good. And I think that even people who might not be into Spring Break could have gotten themselves into it with those two matches last year. You did not get that really on either Spring Break. All right, Ryan, it's time to talk about the Ring of Honor New Japan G1 Supercard. I propose, Ryan, that we start off by getting all of our negativity out of the way, and we talk about everything involving either Ring of Honor booking or Ring of Honor specific matches.
Okay, no, I agree with that. Would you like me to start?
I want to set up the Rambo, so I'm gonna start off, which is technically both Ring of Honor and New Japan. Coming into this Rambo match, which was 30 men, I was kind of thinking to myself, like, this is just going to be fine. It's going to be pointless. It's a way to get just everybody on the card. And I was like, I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to watch it very passively, not get into it. Whoever wins, wins, right? Is that your mentality coming into this Rambo?
Yeah. I mean, all Battle Royals / Royal Rumble matches like that, I think I want to take it as seriously as the promotion is, and I can never really gauge how serious the promotion is taking it. So I just never know. Yeah.
So the funny thing is that the Spring Break clusterfuck had a number of former Ring of Honor talents, including Homicide and Grizzly Redwood. Am I forgetting anyone as far as former Ring of Honor talents? I believe those were like the two big ones. This really did not have any nods to Ring of Honor's past, which I kind of understand. But still, this is like a really big moment, and it never felt like Ring of Honor acknowledged their history, and this is kind of an occasion when they should have done that. What did happen, Jushin Thunder Liger comes out to this enormous reaction. Jushin Thunder Liger, who has never wrestled in Madison Square Garden before. This is this last year in pro wrestling. He's finally getting to do it. He goes in the ring, hits a shote, all kinds of stuff. And it's like, great. Then the 30th number hits, and you're like, who the hell could it possibly be? It's the Great Muta. Again, somebody who has never wrestled in Madison Square Garden. But when you think of Japanese wrestling talents, I think people will generally think of the Great Muta first, especially if you are of a certain age and were watching NWA WCW in 1989 and beyond. The Great Muta is generally associated with pro wrestling, even in the United States, for that long. With the mist, the elbow drop, the moonsault. So you have Jushin Liger and the Great Muta. They're in the ring together. They eliminate every other wrestler. They even use the Kingdom as fodder, which is the only context in which I'm okay with using the Kingdom. They get dumped out by the Legends. You have all of a sudden these two Legends. The entire crowd literally stands up on their feet. They are ready for this great moment. And then Kenny King comes in, eliminates both of them, and the crowd goes silent.
You know, what's interesting to me is that I think Ring of Honor would view it as pretty successful. That when Liger and Muta are in there, and we think it's just and we think that they are the final two participants in this, I think Ring of Honor would think it's successful that we all forgot about Kenny King, that they really pulled one over on us by having Kenny King come in and eliminate them. I would argue that the reason we forgot about Kenny King, that he never got eliminated, is because no one cares about Kenny King, right? That if someone like, I don't know, let's say, I'm scanning the list here, like even if someone like Colt Cabana, if they tried to do a thing where Colt Cabana was never eliminated and they tried to like hide him for a little bit, I would argue maybe some people, like the crowd for instance, would be chanting for Colt Cabana when Muta and Liger are squaring off in the middle of the ring, because people actually like Colt Cabana. With Kenny King, it was very easy to forget that he was never eliminated because Kenny King is pretty much an afterthought. So, I mean, it's very, very tone deaf that this kind of thing happened. It has to be seen as, I mean, a foreshadowing event, if there ever was one, for the rest of the card.
Yeah, and I think in isolation, maybe this is a fine decision. Kenny King wins. All right, fine. Let's talk about some of the other things that happened with Ring of Honor. We had Kelly Klein defeating Mayu Iwatani in 10 minutes. This match was terrible. This match was an abomination. It was for the Women of Honor title. And on this weekend of all weekends, to have Kelly Klein out there being terrible, being able to not move, almost dropping Iwatani on her head multiple times, this was an embarrassment. And I don't care what anyone thinks. Kelly Klein has no business being in a professional wrestling ring. She has been in this business for 10 years. She is horrible. The crowd was silent. They were taking a bathroom break. Again, this weekend of all weekends, when you have a women's match in the main event of WrestleMania, we have women prominently featured throughout the weekend in Shimmer and so many other companies. I mean, look at the way Spring Break ended, for God's sakes. To have Kelly Klein out there winning in this fashion was awful. Then they compound the awfulness by having Angelina Jolie and Velvet Sky of the Beautiful People come out. Mandy Leon runs from the commentary booth, and she turns heel on Kelly Klein, and we have a new group. They are called The Allure. This was an idea suggested by Madison Rayne. Madison Rayne has now departed Ring of Honor. So, coming out of this show, we have Kelly Klein as the Women of Honor champion, feuding with Velvet Sky, who is dating Bully Ray, Angelina Love, and Mandy Leon.
So I didn't know some of the intricacies of that, like who Bully Ray was dating. Maybe I should keep up with this stuff more. I don't know. But look, I mean, what do you even say about this? I think the idea here was that Kelly Klein winning back the title would be a Madison Square Garden moment, right? Because when she lost the title to Iwatani, I remember them doing a video where Kelly Klein was very emotional backstage, and she was almost crying over losing this title and that the title means so much to her. And I legitimately think that Ring of Honor thought that, look, let's have Kelly Klein win the title. It'll be this huge moment of catharsis, and the crowd can see a dream being realized in front of their own eyes. Everyone will be really excited. and then we'll really get a hook in there by ruining Kelly Klein's moment by debuting the beautiful people. I mean, to me, that has to be the thought process. And you have to take so many steps back to get that booking to the point where it even captures what the current indie wrestling crowd likes. Or it's amazing how far off they were with how they booked this Women of Honor title match and the aftermath. It's the type of thing where the only conclusion looking at it is that this is almost a promotion that there's just no hope. I mean, if this is what they're presenting.
And we haven't even gotten to the really bad stuff yet. As up next, we had Bully Ray coming out for his open challenge. This was just a bizarre sequence of events. So they showed Juice Robinson has been attacked. He is down and apparently out. They have this rapper come out. The Ring of Honor / New Japan audience does not want to watch a singing performance, no matter how enthusiastic, no matter how good it is. So what happens? Bully Ray becomes a babyface. He takes out his belt. He starts whipping a black man on pay-per-view. People can see this. This is really happening, and Bully Ray is getting cheered for it. Then this leads to Flip Gordon making his return. Silas Young and Shane Taylor come out. Then Mark Haskins and Juice Robinson, who is apparently fine and is not being looked at by the New York State Athletic Commission. They all come out. They have a 6-man tag. This goes 15 minutes, Ryan. Can you believe this was 15 minutes?
But you know what? Again, though, I think it's just a matter of Ring of Honor wanting to create a moment. Part of me thinks that Juice Robinson's triumphant return from being attacked backstage, they thought that might be a moment. I think one thing I do want to address is that of all the criticism that is being laid out on Twitter, for instance, for what Ring of Honor did with this show, there are people that are saying, look, it's just not a good look for Bully Ray to just be whipping a black man with a chain, right? That this is not something that we should be presenting in 2019. I think there's some pushback on that criticism from some people on Twitter, just not to try to represent their entire pushback. But I think a lot of people go, well, what's the problem with that? It's just an angle or whatever. And I think at the end of the day, one thing that we've talked about on this podcast before with problematic wrestlers and just the moral conscience of where we're at as wrestling fans in 2019, even if you do not necessarily see the problem with Bully Ray whipping this black rapper on pay-per-view with a chain.
The rapper's name, by the way, is Mega Ran, so my apologies. That is irresponsible of me. I need to get this person's name right. So it is Mega Ran who was attacked by Bully Ray.
Right. Okay. So he's whipping Mega Ran with the chain, and I mean, even if we're all not on board with that being problematic, we all should be able then to just acknowledge that that kind of stuff just does not need to happen. And evidence of that is the fact that Ring of Honor, presented a backstage, beating, removing a competitor from a match. They then presented a street fight, a ladder match for their title. There was a worked shoot, which we'll get to. I mean, all of these bells and whistles had to happen on this show just to get Ring of Honor through the show. Whereas New Japan, what did they do? What were their bells and whistles? They just presented a singles match, consistently solid singles matches, and that was pretty much it. I mean, there was no bells and whistles. So the idea that Ring of Honor had to do all of this stuff to create intrigue and then completely failed at creating intrigue, I think the street fight was a good example of that.
I would like to point out that the women's match and the street fight happened back to back about a half hour into the show. So we were on a real roll going into that IWGP Junior Heavyweight title match, which we will discuss in a few minutes. We need to talk about what happened after the tag title match. We're going to talk about the tag title match, but we have to address the fact that Enzo Amore and Big Cass, they quote-unquote jumped the guardrail. This is not something that was addressed on the broadcast, but this is a worked shoot angle. Ryan, you mentioned there were possibly two work shoot angles that were going on in the building that night. The first with Enzo and Cass as they attacked the Briscoes. The Briscoes engaged with them in a brawl. Bully Ray apparently came out because, of course, he has to be involved in anything that is going on work shoot-wise. Enzo Amore and Big Cass are coming in. This is going to piss off a lot of people. A lot of people are going to stop watching Ring of Honor because of this, or at least are going to stop engaging with it as consistently, because Enzo Amore and Big Cass are terrible people, and they're also terrible wrestlers, so there is no reason to bring them in. The second work shoot was David Starr was walking around Madison Square Garden with a sign talking about how evil Sinclair Broadcasting is, and that I don't know if that's going to lead anywhere, but that's the thing as well.
I think you have it right in that somehow Ring of Honor was able to sign two people, Enzo and Cass, that are A, both terrible wrestlers, and B, terrible people. And it's always confusing to me. I mean, we have this dialogue about Rich Swann and Sami Callihan and kind of why they're problematic in a lot of ways morally. But, I mean, look, you could at least make the argument that they're good wrestlers, and you can understand why promotions that just don't really care about the moral landscape of all this will book them. But, I mean, with Enzo and Cass, I'm just struggling. I mean, I think the idea, if anything, is that Enzo in particular creates buzz. But even then, you would have to be ignoring the type of buzz that Enzo creates. I mean, this is not good press that Enzo creates by, going to a WWE pay-per-view and, like, trying to make himself known. I mean, it's just not... I don't know if you're bringing any new eyes to the product by even doing this. I mean, there are so many hurdles you have to jump through to even try to understand how signing Enzo and Cass might be a good idea, that it's just it's astounding. I mean, it's really confusing how Ring of Honor even got to this place in the first place. It's beyond words.
So what's the capper on this shit sandwich? Well, the Ring of Honor title match that went 30 minutes. Matt Taven is the new Ring of Honor champion. You talk about WrestleMania moments. I guess that is what they were going for. Jay Lethal is not the most over guy in the world, but I think he's been one of Ring of Honor's most consistent performers since he returned. I think he's generally been very solid. Marty Scurll is arguably the most over, but he is not long for Ring of Honor, apparently, and I would fully expect within the next few months that he is going to be a part of All Elite Wrestling. So what you're left with is Matt Taven as the Ring of Honor champion, and some people said they were just incredibling the Ring of Honor title. It's hard to disagree. I don't think Matt Taven is very good. The reactions to this match were very bad. The crowd did not care at all. And when we talk about the main event of this show, the real main event of this show, I think that's going to be exemplified. And there was a moment when Jay Lethal threw a contraption of ladders and nearly took out fans in the front row. This match was not bad. I don't think it was nearly as effective as the CHIKARA ladder match. I think more importantly, though, Matt Taven winning the Ring of Honor title signals the beginning of the end for this company. I am not saying that Ring of Honor is going to shut down tomorrow. I'm not saying it's going to shut down in a year, but this is how it starts. This is, combined with everything else that we have talked about, with Kelly Klein winning the women's title, with everything else going on, this is how it starts.
Yeah, and I think if that claim by Jerome sounds extreme, I think you have to at least try to remember or get a sense of how important the Ring of Honor title has been historically at certain periods of time. I mean, we're talking about a title that when I was growing up, and presumably I was, a foolish high schooler, a foolish middle schooler. I mean, the Ring of Honor World title was like sacred to me, right? Like, I was watching the Bryan Danielson title reign, I was watching the Nigel McGuinness title reign play out. I mean, this was a title where, again, like I would be like almost shaking to get out of school because I knew that my Final Battle 2006 DVD was in my mailbox at home, right? Like, I mean, it's just amazing where we're at with Ring of Honor from 2019 or from 2006 to 2019. It's just incredible.
Ha! I see what you did there. Just incredible. Well done.
Yeah. Well, Jerome, I prepare for these podcasts anyway. But Matt Taven, again, I try to remove myself from a lot of the news sheets and the backstage talk. I mean, it doesn't really concern me much anymore. So I foolishly went into the show under the assumption that Scurll winning the title was going to be a foregone conclusion, that he stayed with Ring of Honor because he was going to win the Ring of Honor World title. I had no idea he was on his way out or potentially on his way out. So Matt Taven winning was, I think, extra shocking to me because I had just assumed that Marty Scurll was going to win. And I think Marty Scurll winning would have been the right reading of the Ring of Honor crowd at the moment. And it just Matt Taven, I mean, he was getting heat, but I don't know if it was good heat. And the match was fine if you remove that this is the Ring of Honor main event on maybe their biggest show ever. It went half an hour, which I think is just way too long.
Right, and I think that this, from a Ring of Honor perspective, the show was a disaster. Period, end of story. I don't give a damn what the audience was. When the audience bought their tickets for this show, they thought they were going to see the Young Bucks and Cody Rhodes. Those three people were nowhere to be found. They will be in All Elite Wrestling, Double or Nothing, All In 2. That's where they're going to be. Ring of Honor right now has Matt Taven as one of their champions. They have Jeff Cobb, who we're going to talk about in a minute. The Gorillas of Destiny are the tag team champions. They are not even Ring of Honor regulars. Kelly Klein is their women's champion. And the feud that you have to look forward to for that Ring of Honor world title is Matt Taven versus Kenny King.
Right, and it's not even clear to me. I mean, Kenny King is not a face, right? I mean, he robbed us of Muta against Liger. So, and Matt Taven's certainly not a face. I mean, what? I don't even know how to form a sentence about that, because you have a heel Matt Taven against a heel Kenny King for your title. That is the next. That's your money match coming out of this show.
And then the rumor is that Bully Ray's influence is growing within the Ring of Honor office. That is also a disaster, because Bully Ray, he has infested so many companies, and he is about putting one person over, and that is himself. And quite frankly, when you're getting these work shoots, when you're getting Velvet Sky out there, it is a very poor reflection of Ring of Honor. And I think New Japan should go with All Elite Wrestling. I think they should do it as soon as possible, because if you had told me after watching this show that Ring of Honor was purposefully trying to sabotage New Japan, I would have believed you, because everything that they did on this show seemed to serve to undermine things that New Japan was doing. They literally do this work shoot angle with Enzo Amore and Cass before Hiroshi fucking Tanahashi comes out. They have this ladder main event that goes 30 minutes before another 30-minute IWGP title match. I'm telling you, it's like Ring of Honor purposefully tried to sabotage New Japan. And I could say the same thing about the Honor Rumble where they had Muta and Liger face off. It's the same principle.
I think if I look at the Ring of Honor side of this, and you know, I'm going to be talking about wrestlers that weren't necessarily in strictly Ring of Honor matches, but if I look at who's exciting in Ring of Honor right now, I would name Jeff Cobb, Roosh, and Bandito. And these are three wrestlers that Ring of Honor signed like 4 months ago. I mean, and these are people who did not gain any popularity because of what Ring of Honor did for them, or because Ring of Honor built them up. I mean, the exciting aspects of Ring of Honor right now, in terms of wrestlers, have really nothing to do with Ring of Honor. It's pretty much just based off of their work elsewhere. So I'm just struggling to think of anything that Ring of Honor has done well in the past year that, again, doesn't involve people that have already left the promotion.
All right, I think we've talked about Ring of Honor enough. Let's focus on the positive aspects of this card, which there is still some Ring of Honor talent, but a lot of it is New Japan based. We had 2 title-for-title matches. The first one was Ring of Honor TV champion Jeff Cobb versus never openweight champion Will Ospreay. Will Ospreay is very bad at Twitter. He is very good at wrestling. This was as good of an opener as you could have hoped for. Jeff Cobb winning both titles after hitting back-to-back Tour of the Islands. I really, really love this match. I have this at 4.5 stars. This, to me, is probably the second or third best match of the weekend, in my view. Words escape me, because not only was this good, but this only went 12 minutes and 50 seconds. So they got their stuff in and they got out of the ring. They told a good story. This was so well done in my view.
Yeah, and again, the backstage stuff behind this, I don't know who is responsible for these crossover matches where there was a chance for a Ring of Honor guy to win a New Japan title and vice versa. But I mean, in terms of picking a match to open the show, I think this was fairly obvious. And I think Jeff Cobb, in terms of the crowd response, I think Jeff Cobb has done himself a lot of favors, probably ever since Bola of last year, because for a while, I mean, I view Jeff Cobb as someone who was obviously very unique in terms of what he was presenting, but I was not seeing the great matches from Jeff Cobb. And then, I went to Bowl, I was there in person, and kind of watching Jeff Cobb over that weekend in last September, just like a switch turned on, right? And suddenly Jeff Cobb has become this guy who, if he's on the show, you kind of want to watch his match because it's going to, on average, be pretty good. And so I think Jeff Cobb has made a lot of progression over the past year or so. And this could almost be seen as the culmination of that. I mean, you're opening the biggest show maybe in Ring of Honor history, and you win a New Japan title. I mean, it's good for him. I mean, this was the right way to start the show. And the only way this could have been the wrong way to start the show is if the crowd was upset with Ospreay losing. But I think, again, Jeff Cobb has positioned himself so well and has delivered these really good performances that him winning the title actually seemed like a nice, upbeat way to start the show.
And I think Jeff Cobb, over the last year has really developed. I think he had a really good match with Tomohiro Ishii last year. And I think this is kind of the culmination of his 1 year journey to becoming a full-fledged Ring of Honor New Japan superstar. And I think the sky's the limit for this guy, whether he stays in Ring of Honor or whether he eventually goes on to either All Elite Wrestling or WWE. I think the world is his oyster right now, and he was just absolutely spectacular. This was kind of a Ring of Honor match, but I want to talk about it here because I think this was a smart move to have a 19-second match as Rush defeated Dalton Castle. Dalton Castle is apparently still really injured. He may not be able to be what he once was, and I think it's really sad that Dalton Castle is maybe not going to be the performer that we all thought he would be. But if he cannot do that, then I think it only makes sense to have Rush win in this amount of time and get somebody else over.
This is an interesting one for me because Dalton Castle, I started watching Dalton Castle in 2012 when he was in IWC. And, it was very obvious, right, that he was a great promo and that he could really go in the ring. And I really thought it was a matter of time before he ended up somewhere like Ring of Honor or Impact or somewhere. And it's kind of amazing what Ring of Honor has done to Dalton Castle. He had a fun feud against Silas Young over the boys and stuff like that. But I think they probably put the title on him too early. And I just never really envisioned Dalton Castle being in this kind of place. But I agree that given where he is now, Rush winning in 15 seconds did make sense. And there's a storyline flavor to it where Dalton Castle broke away from the boys after the match, or at least showed his discontent with them. So yeah, I think this was fine. This was going to be a long show, and Dalton Castle against Rush was not one of the more anticipated matches on the show. With that said, I think I'm still waiting for Rush's Ring of Honor breakout performance. But again, I don't think this was going to be it anyway, so I think the quick match made sense.
And then, of course, we had the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title as CML representative Dragon Lee defeated the Ring of Honor new representative Bandito, recently signed a contract, and the champion representing New Japan and Bullet Club, Taiji Ishimori. This went under 9 minutes. This was literally everything you could do in 9 minutes. Again, spectacular. I had this as 4 stars, a tremendous showcase of talent. And I think these 3-ways can sometimes not work because they fall into the trap of having 2 guys wrestle on the inside, 1 person on the outside. They really did not fall into that trap. And I think that's one of the reasons that it was so short. But Dragon Lee came away with the victory. And I think this was a tremendous moment for him and for CMLL, because as much as we talk about Ring of Honor and New Japan's relationship, CMLL is the third cog in this wheel, and I think they are important. I think both Ring of Honor and New Japan see value in this relationship, and I think it was good that Dragon Lee got the win here.
It's amazing to see what they did in 9 minutes when, again, this immediately followed the 15-minute Bully Ray street fight, right? And it's just a tale of 2 stories. This was really, really good. It felt like the main event of All In, where they were obviously given a short amount of time, and they killed it. And it just when we talk about these matches, it's so hard to view them as Ring of Honor matches, even in the slightest, because it's just so clear that both Jeff Cobb and Bandito, these were guys that made names for themselves, that we were aware of them long before Ring of Honor, and they were signings by Ring of Honor to try to fill the void that people like Cody and the Young Bucks left. And so to me, if there's anything good in Ring of Honor right now, it's the fact that wrestlers like Bandito and Jeff Cobb can get these opportunities in New Japan. Or you can talk about a host of people, Mark Haskins, Tracy Williams, all the people that they signed recently. This was a great match. Again, just as impactful, but again, quite different as the opener because Jeff Cobb obviously brought a certain dynamic to the opener that wasn't really present here. But what more could you ask for in 9 minutes?
And then you had another match that went under 10 minutes. So I think that this show had a really good pace when it wasn't Ring of Honor fucking things up. But you had IWGP Tag Team Champions, the Gorillas of Destiny, also winning the Ring of Honor titles as they defeated PCO and Brody King, the Briscoes, Sonata, and Evil. A lot of people have complained about the fact that Sonata is very boring. I don't think a lot of people are fans of the Briscoes these days, but nobody really got a chance to be overexposed here. I really like this for what it was. PCO taking a powerbomb to the outside was absolutely insane. Brody King, you can tell he is improving by so much every single day, and I'm really glad that he is in a company where he is going to be able to get a chance to showcase himself on national television for whatever that's worth, even if it is Ring of Honor. But I think Brody King is another really good signing, and I am not necessarily the biggest fans of the Gorillas of Destiny, but I thought they were perfectly acceptable here, and I really like this match. It's weird because I think about individually, I don't really like or have a particular passion for anyone, but I think the package that this match came in, I think it worked.
I agree. I don't have much to add. I think it was probably a little on the short end for me, but, look, I think the one takeaway for me from this match is that Ring of Honor thought that PCO needed a special entrance. They had PCO pretty much rise out from an electric chair with some kind of mad scientist character behind him. Look, I mean that to me yells a situation where that entrance is probably never going to help PCO, and if anything, it can make him seem kind of lame. I think you kind of have to let PCO be PCO. Unless PCO called for that kind of entrance, the whole thing seemed a little hokey. This was a fine match. I'm not a huge fan of the Gorillas of Destiny. I think Tama Tonga is very bad at Twitter. Again, it's one of those things where as I was watching this match, the thought actually occurred to me, like, do Evil and Sonata want to be Ring of Honor Tag Team Champions? I mean, the disparity between the promotions was particularly high here, where it was like, how valuable are the Ring of Honor Tag Team titles anymore? I mean, what kind of image do they even have? So I guess I can't imagine the Gorillas of Destiny will have a long title reign. I'm just very curious as to who they will lose the titles to after this tremendous Enzo and Cass signing.
And then we had the Rev Pro British Heavyweight title match as Zack Sabre Jr. defeated Hiroshi Tanahashi in 15 minutes. Some of these match times are really great for despite the fact that main events maybe went a little too long. I thought this was perfect at 15 minutes. I love the fact that Tanahashi was trying to play Zack Sabre's game, and he failed. We didn't really see a lot of high spots. We didn't really see a lot of near falls. Zack Sabre Jr. tapped Tanahashi out after about 15 minutes with his submission. I think he came across like a giant star. I think it's unfortunate that a lot of the Twitter reaction was talking about Enzo and Cass, but I think in the long term for New Japan, Zack Sabre Jr. was an absolute star in this match. I loved it.
Yeah, I think Zack Sabre Jr. is someone who, is just, for whatever reason, just does not want to go to the WWE, and he's perfectly happy doing his thing here. I think this was a good match. I expected Sabre to win, but still, I think they worked a good match, and the crowd seemed very shocked at Tanahashi tapping. So I think the finish kind of left an impact, and this was 15 minutes again where, they had the limb work in there, and I was wondering how much that Naito and Ibushi as well as White and Okada would rely on limb work. They didn't really rely on it as much, so it had its place here. This was just a good 15-minute match. You could kind of sink your teeth into it, dissect what was going on. It was different than everything else that came before it, so very good.
Kind of want to go back and rewatch this just because I think there's some subtlety here that I may have missed, and these two have had a number of excellent matches around the world. The IWGP Intercontinental title match, Kota Ibushi finally becoming the Intercontinental Champion, winning in about 20 minutes. Again, I think this match went the perfect length. This is my favorite match of the weekend because it was spectacular. I love the fact that Naito worked Ibushi's neck for the entire match, and they didn't try to do leg work. Every time they do leg work on Ibushi, it is a waste of time because he's not going to sell. With the neck, it can be more subtle, and you can build up to the Dustino, which is what happened. And I thought this match was absolutely spectacular. These are two of the very best wrestlers in the world. I'm not even sure if Ibushi was the best wrestler in this match because I think Naito, when he wants to be, I think he is spectacular. And again, I'm not somebody who watches New Japan on a regular basis. I catch what I can, but I thought this was so effective as kind of the New Japan semi-main event. And I think if you take away Ring of Honor, I think this functions as the absolute perfect way to go into the IWGP Heavyweight Championship match because it was just so different from the Rev Pro title match. It was different from the Junior title match. It was different than both title for titles and the heavyweight title. Everything with New Japan was just, it felt so different.
I agree, and I was concerned maybe it wouldn't, but it seems pretty clear that New Japan was taking this show pretty seriously, and I think this was the first indication of wow. I mean, New Japan is using this show, this platform, to have some big things happen, and it almost seems like, I mean, again, one way to look at the disparity between New Japan and Ring of Honor is that the rosters are so different. The quality of wrestler on the quality of wrestler on the New Japan roster is so much higher than Ring of Honor. You could conceivably have the disparity that we have in the show and just blame it on the fact that Ring of Honor's roster is just not very good. But I actually think if you just assume that the talent is equal, just the moments that New Japan presented to us, you could tell that they were taking this show much more seriously than Ring of Honor. Ring of Honor's idea of a moment on the show, I mean, it kind of speaks for itself. New Japan's version of a moment was quite well built up because Ibushi winning this title is a big deal. I mean, if you follow New Japan for however many years, this title has eluded Ibushi, and he won it here. And I think what was pretty obviously the best match on the show. So, yeah, I mean, I think this pretty much just had everything you would want. Ibushi did this Hurricane Rana on Naito from the apron to the floor. It was one of the prettiest Hurricane Ranas you'd ever see. It was done on the apron rather than in the center of the ring. I mean, just insane stuff. No complaints here from this.
And then we had what has become a pretty divisive match. That would be Kazuchika Okada defeating Jay White to become the IWGP champion for a fifth time. If this match goes 22 minutes instead of 32 minutes, I think we are talking about this as perhaps the best match of the weekend because I think the finishing stretch is probably among one of the best finishing stretches I've seen in a wrestling match in probably a year or two. Unfortunately, I think this went too long. I think part of it was undoubtedly caused by Ring of Honor's title match going too long. I think there are a lot of legitimate criticisms that can be made about Jay White and kind of what he brings. I think he draws some good heat at times, but I think there's something missing, and I can't quite put my finger on it. This is something that I know is a criticism that has been levied by other people. But despite the fact that I don't think the first 10 minutes were great, I still have this at about 4.25 stars because the finishing stretch was that good. And the other thing is, to me, I think when you look at Okada compared to Jay Lethal, Matt Taven, even Marty Scurll, I look at Okada and I see him and I think that guy walks like a star, wrestles like a star, carries himself like a star. From the moment he comes out to the moment that he leaves the arena. And that, to me, just fundamentally explains the difference between the New Japan talents and the Ring of Honor talents. Okada, for all of his faults, and he's certainly not perfect, that guy is a star, and it's really hard to argue with giving him this moment in Madison Square Garden.
It was definitely a good way to end the show with the moment. With that said, I was not a fan of this match. I actually didn't really care for it all that much. I think obviously it did go too long. I think this is probably just something that comes up a lot in IWGP title matches, right? I mean, we've seen, obviously, if you read TJ Hawk's reviews of any of the New Japan big shows, one of the consistent themes for him is that these New Japan World Heavyweight title matches go on way too long. And I don't think it would be as big of a problem for me if during the first 15 to 20 minutes of this match, something interesting happened. I mean, I struggled to find anything interesting happening up until Jay White started just kind of very laxly dodging Okada's offense by just kind of like slumping to the mat. Apparently that's something he does somewhat regularly. I thought that was kind of interesting and how Okada would respond to that. But up until that point, I was struggling to find just anything to kind of sink my teeth into, or anything that I thought would carry into the later stage of the match. With that said, I would agree about the finishing stretch. I think the end result was correct. Ending with Okada winning the IWGP Heavyweight title is, again, the crowd loved it. And I think the crowd woke up down the stretch. But this was something, again, the show was going very long, and I would have liked seeing something here more of the flavor of Naito and Ibushi. It seemed like Naito and Ibushi just had a better understanding of what this crowd needed. And I think Jay White and Okada eventually got there with that finishing stretch, but I think it took way too long.
Right, and I understand what you're saying, and I certainly think this is not going to be the match for everyone, and I think some of the criticisms are legitimate. I do wish that this had gone shorter, but I think this felt like it accomplished a lot more in the macro sense. It really felt like New Japan made a big statement in the United States for the first time. I know that they've run shows here, they've been with Ring of Honor, but what have those shows, a lot of those matches really given to New Japan? This was the time they're running Madison Square Garden. This is a big arena. It really felt like for the first time they put their absolute best foot forward, and this felt like a New Japan A show as opposed to a B show that is in Korakuen Hall.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, there might have been some skepticism when this show was announced about how seriously New Japan was going to take it, and I think it's pretty clear with the Okada and Ibushi title wins that they took it about as seriously as they possibly could. So, I think the general consensus coming out of the show is that there is absolutely very little to complain about coming from the New Japan side of things. And again, I think the only real exciting aspect of the Ring of Honor stuff is that guys like Bandito and Cobb could potentially get more opportunities in New Japan. I mean, that is really the only exciting part about the Ring of Honor side of things right now.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Spring Break very briefly here, because there is a part of this that I want to address, but I kind of want to buzz through the first three matches very quickly. Jungle Boy defeated Joey Janela. I just thought it was a good match. I don't think it was great, but I thought it served its purpose. It's unfortunate that this show had to start 45 minutes after its scheduled starting time, because Joey Janela did not realize that Ring of Honor and New Japan would run for so long. And maybe you could criticize Joey Janela, but in this case, I'm glad that they at least waited a few minutes to start the show later. The other thing that I want to point out about this show, the Rock and Roll Express and LAX had a really fun, interesting, good match. I'm not going to say, again, it was great, but seeing Ricky Morton do a Canadian Destroyer was pretty wild, and it's pretty amazing to see two 60-year-old guys just be able to still go and to at least bring a modicum of what they could in the 1980s and early 90s. And LA Park defeated Masato Tanaka, and it was a good brawl. Again, about 3.25 stars. I think that would kind of be my ratings for these first three matches, and that's really about it. I mean, I think Spring Break Part 2 was intended to kind of be a little bit shorter because they couldn't run 4.5 hours with the different nights and whatnot, but I think these first three matches were satisfactory.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the big draw to Part 2 was the main event, the clusterfuck. And it is odd that we're getting to a point in our podcasting careers where I'm just openly cussing, which again is I'm a little uncomfortable with it. I'm afraid again of getting grounded, but I mean that is the name of the match, so we're gonna let it slide, hopefully. So it almost felt like these first three matches were there to obviously have some semblance of a card, and again, I think the LAX match was fun insofar as it seemed like LAX were having a moment. Like they were getting to wrestle a tag team that they really admired or maybe grew up with. So that was cool. We talked about the Jungle Boy match against Joey Janela a little bit during part one, where I think it was pretty much just an improvement over Janela's match against Marcus Stunt. And the Masato Tanaka match, it kind of was what it was. You kind of know what you're getting yourself into. What's curious to me, though, is that if this show was set up to have the clusterfuck as the main draw, like coming out of last year, like the sense to me was not that the clusterfuck was this highly anticipated thing. Like if anything, it struck me as something that we all kind of maybe put up with because it has its fun moments, but is like ultimately too long. Kind of like on King of Trios weekend, the tag team gauntlet, right? Where there might be some good things about it, but it really is long and we don't know if it's necessary. Like that's where I thought we all were with that, with the clusterfuck. But was I wrong to think that this is not something that everyone loved? Like, because apparently they positioned it this year as like the main attraction to the show.
Well, I think part of the reason that they did that is they announced people like Nate Webb, who is going to have a draw to a certain audience, NWO Sting, S.A. Rios, that they were announcing people for the clusterfuck like it was going to be a big deal. So I would imagine that is kind of what they were going for in building up to this as the main attraction of the weekend. And you can debate whether that was the right move or not, but ultimately they sold out both shows. So they ultimately, they got us, I guess, and we were watching this, but I think that the clusterfuck, look, I don't mind it, but I think it went too long. I think when you have 60 people in a match and there's all kinds of chaos, you don't know what the rules are, the commentary is trying at times. I mean, look, if you're going to do this, you might as well have Dave Prazak on commentary and not Drew Cordero. But I just think there were some very problematic elements to this match that kind of bothered me, and there was also the moment of catharsis at the end with all the women hitting Jimmy Lloyd with the light tubes. And I don't know, GCW is a really strange company for a lot of reasons, because on the one hand, they have a situation where they have a person with no legs who may or may not become a regular part of their roster. So they are being inclusive in including someone with a disability. I think that's a positive thing. I think having all of those women attack Jimmy Lloyd and possibly doing either an intergender show later on this year or next year, that's going to be a really big deal because Spring Break sells out no matter what. And they have not done a good job of showcasing the women. But apparently that's something that they're going to be able to do now. And that is only a good thing for a lot of these female wrestlers because, let's face it, these GCW fans are not the most progressive in the world. And if you can slowly bring in the women and get the women over, I think that's a hugely positive thing. On the other hand, if you look at the list of the people that are involved in this match, there's a lot of people with either rap sheets or who have some very problematic elements to them. The Necro Butcher, Rich Swann, Schlack, Marcus Crane. I can't really think of anyone else, but I do want to talk about the Schlack and Marcus Crane thing specifically because this is something that really does bother me, and I know that it bothers a lot of other people on Twitter, and I would not feel right not talking about it. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Schlack is a guy who's a terrible wrestler, but that is almost beside the point for the purposes of this discussion. And Ryan, I know you're not into the backstage stuff, but I think that this is something that is worth mentioning and discussing, is that Schlack has had an association with white supremacists and white supremacist groups, and he has never really disavowed them. So that is why people often will refer to Schlack as a Nazi or a Nazi sympathizer. Marcus Crane is also regarded as a Nazi sympathizer because he is friends with Schlack. And Marcus Crane also did drugs while a wrestling show was going on. He literally did drugs while a match was going on at a GCW event. So I have a real problem with those two being involved on any show, really, because they're not very good. I don't think that they have a place in wrestling from a moral standpoint, because if we look at this world around us, Nazis, white supremacists, they exist. Their viewpoints should not be represented, and if there is any doubt in your mind about someone as a white supremacist, I don't think they really have any business on your wrestling show. The Rich Swann situation is very complicated. I cannot pretend to get into the weeds about a lot of it, but I am not totally comfortable with him being a part of wrestling shows either, because he's never really showed any contrition for his behavior, and I think that some of his Twitter behavior has been reprehensible, and that's one of the reasons that it's really hard for me to get into GCW as a promotion, because they bring people like this in. That is not to mention Teddy Hart. Teddy Hart, one of his girlfriends, disappears. He gets investigated by police. There's really no follow-up. Teddy Hart also has a history of no-showing events. He has a history of being unprofessional. He has been fired by WWE multiple times. I don't think that he should be on wrestling shows either for those reasons. I also look at the fact that he is training cats, apparently, to be a part of his shows. Not totally comfortable with that either, because I don't know whether these animals are being abused, because, again, I don't trust Teddy Hart to be the most competent human being in the world. And there's Tracy Smothers, who comes out wearing a Confederate flag, and that's kind of the icing on the cake. Tracy Smothers, I get that people love him for what he did in the 80s and 90s for WWF and WCW, but what value is he bringing right now other than the fact that he wears the Confederate flag to the ring? And the Confederate flag, for a lot of people in this country, represents slavery. And I don't think I want that viewpoint represented on my wrestling either.
No, I mean, I think you laid everything out well. I mean, I agree, obviously, with all that. And I'm more on your side of things in terms of who I want on shows and what I want to watch. And I honestly, it's gotten to the point where, truthfully, I don't review many shows anymore. I mean, I think I've posted like one review this year, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of falling out of love with it. I don't like giving coverage to a lot of things that I'm just not really sure about. And I think at the end of the day, everyone, if you're an independent pro wrestling fan, you're going to have preferences, and you get to have preferences, right? Like, Jerome, you get to not want to support shows with certain people on them. And I think the first step is just getting to a place where fans of GCW are okay with your viewpoint, right? That, even if I disagree with your viewpoint, let's say on Schlack, which, again, seems hard to do, but let's say I did, that I could at least just say, okay, you get to have those preferences. I understand. If enough people have those preferences and enough people quit watching GCW, I don't think the reaction from GCW and its fans would probably be, oh, we understand, our bad, right? I think the reaction would, and I see this a lot, is just, well, political correctness or all these things. And I think that's where we kind of fall off the rails, where, again, we don't want to support Schlack. He's still on these shows, and that is just something we are going to have to face. And I don't know. I mean, I'm okay with there not being this. I'm not seeing on Twitter the type of group outrage about Schlack. I don't think we're at that point yet. But I also don't think there's anything wrong with just drawing awareness to it and just kind of making it clear that there are these problematic people and trying to inform people about why we might take issue with them being on shows. There's certainly not a lack of talent out there right now. WrestleMania weekend is the showcase for that in terms of the independent companies. So again, having to book Schlack, having to book Marcus Crane, these are very confusing things. I don't know. Again, it's perplexing. It's unfortunate when it happens in the context of not being advertised, right? Because I think that was something we found with AAW and Michael Elgin last year when they brought Michael Elgin to a show and had him perform unadvertised. So I think if we can get to a point where at least you can announce when you're bringing these types of people to your show and they're going to be on the show, that is That would be a good first step. Let's just make it clear who's on the shows.
I mean, I agree with you, because I think if I had known all of the participants that were going to be in this clusterfuck, I think I would have had second thoughts about reviewing either one of the spring breaks, because I have no interest in giving positive press to a company that is going to use some of these types of people. And again, I think everybody has to make a decision for themselves about what they can tolerate, because at the end of the day, I think we're all hypocrites in the way that we operate. There are certain things that we are going to watch for our own reasons, and there are certain places we are going to draw the line. No person is perfect when it comes to this. When you watch a WWE show, there are problematic elements there. When you watch a Ring of Honor show, Sinclair Broadcasting, I would argue, is as problematic as any of the wrestlers that were in the clusterfuck. So ultimately, you have to have your own lines, and I think part of the issue is trying to figure out where that is. I think what pro wrestling has to do, it has to start cleaning itself up of some of these individuals like Schlack and Marcus Crane, and getting them out, and the Tracy Smothers, not booking them on shows. I think that's where it has to start, because I think if you stop booking some of these individuals, then that's really going to make a difference, and you are going to make a lot more people feel comfortable about going to your shows. Because I'll be honest, if I'm a female wrestling fan and I see that there are certain wrestlers that are advertised who have these allegations against them, I'm not going to feel comfortable even being in the same building as these people. And if I am a Jewish person, am I going to feel comfortable going to a GCW show where Schlack is getting very positive reactions from the crowd? That's not something that I would necessarily feel comfortable with either. So, and the reason that I'm saying this is because GCW has a lot of attention on itself. I think it has earned some of that because they have put on quality shows, unique shows. They seem very fan-friendly at times. And I think Joey Janela has been very responsive to some of the things that have gone on. And we've mentioned the fact that they've included women and people who have disabilities. But to me, when you get to this point, when you are a GCW and you are not just a deathmatch company show, you are going to get a lot more scrutiny. And it's how you respond to that scrutiny that is going to determine whether GCW is going to be a flash in the pan, or whether we're going to be talking about GCW in 5 to 10 years still as one of the predominant independent wrestling companies in the world. Because Ring of Honor had a decision to make at one point about Rob Feinstein, and they made a decision to completely separate. That company almost shut down because of their affiliation with Rob Feinstein. The fact that they're around 15 years later, they did it because they separated. And I think GCW has to make some of these same choices. And I think a lot of wrestling companies are going to have to make these same choices. Because this is not just an independent wrestling issue. This is also an issue that Ring of Honor has to deal with some of its talent. And WWE does as well. Why is Hulk Hogan allowed to walk on stage at the Hall of Fame when he has never shown any contrition for any of the things that he has done and said about people of color? Look, and I heard that the New Day did not exactly positively respond to Hogan, and I don't blame them one single bit. We have to take the trash out in wrestling. That is the only way that you're going to be able to engage the audience, because if you look around what's going on in the world, you can try to cover your ears, you can try to cover your eyes, but people are really starting to care about who they are supporting, the companies, the individuals. And if pro wrestling does not get with the times, then they do not deserve to exist as an art form.
I think that's well said, and I think the Hulk Hogan example is telling in a lot of ways, because if you watch the Hall of Fame ceremony, I've seen pictures of it online of the New Day's reaction with them sitting in their seats as Hulk Hogan is talking, right? But I want to get away from the idea that it's right to condemn Hulk Hogan. It's also right to condemn someone like Schlack, and you can't just do it when it's cool, right? So the New Day are obviously this very cool act, and, you know, them looking rightfully upset as Hulk Hogan is talking is one thing. It's a lot less, I guess, sexy to say that you wouldn't have bought Spring Break had you known Schlack and Marcus Crane were going to be on the show. But I don't think one is any less warranted than the other. So again, I mean, it is one of those things where, and I mean, again, and maybe the situations are different, right? And I keep going back to this, but you knew Hulk Hogan was going to be at the Hall of Fame ceremony, so you could choose not to watch that part of it or whatever. We didn't know that Schlack was going to be in this clusterfuck, right? So I think a good first step, and I think that is why I quit reviewing AEW when they did the Michael Elgin thing unannounced, is that just announce who's going to be on your show. I mean, for one, just taking the problematic people out of it, I always think it's a good general rule to announce matches for shows. But I also think giving the consumer the choice both to get the most quality out of what they buy, but also to make moral decisions in a year where that kind of stuff is now something that we all have to face, I think it's just a good rule of thumb. And, I think that's pretty much all I would have to say about that. But yeah, is there anything else you want to add, or are we going to wrap up?
We have gone just about 3 hours, so I think we are going to wrap things up. But Ryan, I think we need to do a part 2 because there's still some business that I want to take care of in a part 2.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you wanted to perhaps rewatch Black Label and talk about that, or?
No, what I want to do is there are a couple of additional shows that I wanted to discuss. One of them for sure being AIW, because I feel like we owe them an apology, because we were going to review them and then we reviewed Black Label Pro instead. Black Label was really bad and AIW was pretty good. We're going to bury Scott Steiner versus Hornswoggle, but we're going to say generally very positive things about the rest of that show. We have not talked a lot about women's wrestling, and I would like to review Shimmer as well. So we are going to do that. And Ryan, I also want to do something a little bit different. This is something that I've done on another podcast I do, but I want to draft, you and I are going to draft a team of winners and losers from all of WrestleMania weekend, and we will include NXT and WWE in that. So we're going to draft teams of winners and losers. Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, that sounds good. Jerome, I like podcasting with you. We're on this new podcasting network, so this is exciting stuff.
So we will do a part 2 later on in the week. We're going to make some plans, record, and get to it. But for right now, we are going to call it a day/night. We hope you had a great WrestleMania weekend. We hope you have some recommendations for additional matches. We will come back later this week. Of course, I want to thank Larry Csonka for allowing us to host our podcast on his network. Larry, we are so glad that you are still around and reviewing shows all across WrestleMania weekend. Hopefully one day I can meet you in person and officially do the brother handshake. So for Ryan Rozanski, my name is Jerome Cusson. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back later this week.